They say there are two kinds of reckless people in this world: those who don't know fear, and those who have looked death in the eye so many times they've simply stopped bothering to flinch. Rowan Vale was the second kind. Tonight, she sat across from a man whose face no one had ever seen. Hood pulled low, hands flat on the table, the iron dice rolling slow toward her like a declaration of war. The entire tavern had gone quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of an evening winding down, but the held breath quiet of a room full of people watching something they didn't quite believe was happening. No one had beaten him. In 3 nights, not a single soul had even come close. The man across from her had taken everything from everyone who sat in that chair: coin, pride, the particular light that goes out in a person's eyes when they realize, too late, that they were never really playing a game at all. Rowan picked up the dice. She smiled. If you want to know what happens when a nameless drifter with nothing but nerve and a dead woman's dice bets everything she has against the most powerful man in the kingdom, stay until the end, hit like, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? The night Rowan Vale rode into the settlement of Ashfin, the sky above the frontier was the color of a bruise, that particular shade of purple-black that came not from sunset but from a storm that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to break. She had learned, over the years, to read skies the way other people read faces. Both could lie. But skies, at least, eventually told the truth. She pulled her horse, a bony, bad-tempered roan she'd won 3 settlements back in a card game against a man who'd been too drunk to count his own hand, to a stop just outside the main road into town. From here, she could see the lights of Ashfin bleeding orange through the gaps between buildings. She could hear music, laughter, the particular kind of noise a settlement made when it was pretending everything was fine. Rowan had lived long enough to know that the louder the pretending, the worse the truth underneath. She was 24 years old. She had been thrown out of her first home at 9. In the 15 years since, she had passed through more frontier towns than she could count, leaving behind her a trail of empty pockets belonging to people who had made the mistake of underestimating her. She carried 2 things of value: a set of carved bone dice that had belonged to her mother, and a mind that never stopped moving. She did not carry sentiment. She had tried that once. It hadn't worked out. Ashfin was a border settlement, one of dozens scattered along the rough territory where the human towns bled into shifter lands. This close to the boundary, you got used to seeing people who weren't quite people. Men and women whose eyes caught the firelight wrong, who moved a half-second faster than they should, whose voices carried harmonics that made the back of your neck prickle. Rowan had no particular feelings about shifters. They were like everyone else, some honest, most not, all of them capable of taking your money if you let your guard down. She clicked her tongue at the roan and let him pick his way down the hill toward the settlement gate. The guard at the entrance was a big man with the too-still quality of someone trying hard to look relaxed. He looked her over with the practiced disinterest of a man who'd stood in the cold too many times to be impressed by much. "Passing through?" he asked. "Stopping for the night," Rowan said. "Maybe 2 nights, depending on the hospitality. We don't get many single riders. I don't travel in packs." She held his gaze without blinking. "Is there a problem?" The guard looked at her for a moment longer, assessing, she knew, not just her but the horse, the road-worn quality of her clothes, the particular way she sat in the saddle that said she'd been doing this a long time. Then he stepped aside. "The Broken Wheel's the best tavern," he said. "Tell Marta at the bar I sent you. She'll give you a fair price on a room." "Much obliged," Rowan said, though she had no intention of mentioning anyone's name to anyone. She'd learned early that debts, even small social ones, had a way of compounding. She stabled the roan, paid in advance, and walked to the Broken Wheel with her pack over one shoulder and her eyes moving the way they always did, cataloging exits, reading the body language of everyone she passed, noting which doorways had light under them and which didn't. The habit was so deep now it didn't feel like caution anymore. It just felt like breathing. The Broken Wheel was exactly what a frontier tavern was supposed to be: loud, warm, slightly too crowded, and smelling of wood smoke and cheap ale, and the particular human and not quite human musk that places like this always had. 3 musicians in the corner were playing something fast and a little frantic. A group of women near the fire were laughing at something one of them had said. The kind of laugh that had been earned through a long and difficult evening. A pair of shifter men at the far end of the bar were watching the room with the quiet attentiveness of people who were never entirely off duty. Rowan got herself a drink, found a corner with her back to the wall and a clear line of sight to both doors, and started paying attention. This was the part that people who had never made a living at games of chance didn't understand. They thought the skill was in the playing. It wasn't. The skill was in the watching. Every person in a room was a story, and every story had tells. The way a man touched his coin purse when he was bluffing, the way a woman's shoulders relaxed when she was dealt a hand she liked, the particular stillness that fell over a table when someone was about to do something stupid. Rowan watched and drank and waited. It was the stillness that caught her attention. There was a table in the center of the room, prime real estate in any tavern, too exposed for Rowan's taste but perfect for someone who wanted to be seen. At that table sat 5 players in various states of dejection, and one figure who was not dejected at all. The figure wore a cloak with the hood pulled up, which was unusual enough inside a warm tavern to be a statement rather than an oversight. The hood shadowed the face almost completely, but the hands on the table were visible, long-fingered, steady, the kind of hands that moved with absolute economy, no wasted gestures, no nervous habits. The dice at the center of the table were iron cast, heavy, the kind used in serious games rather than casual ones. Rowan watched the hooded figure play for 20 minutes without moving from her corner. He was good, genuinely good, not the cheap, flashy good of someone who'd learned a few tricks and was relying on other people's inexperience, but the quiet, structural good of someone who understood probability and human psychology at a level that most people never reached. He won consistently, but not dramatically. He didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He simply made the right decision, again and again, with the unhurried patience of a man who had all the time in the world. The other players didn't seem to realize they'd been outmatched until they'd already lost. That was the best kind of skill, the kind that looked like luck. Around her, Rowan heard the murmurs that had apparently been circulating before she arrived. He's been here 3 nights. Nobody's beaten him. Somebody tried to tip the table and his friend stopped it. He never shows his face. He never drinks. The murmurs had the quality of something between admiration and unease. The feeling a crowd gets when they're watching something they don't entirely understand. Rowan finished her drink, set the cup down, picked up her bone dice and turned them over once in her fingers, feeling the familiar worn edges. Then she walked to the table. The chair scraped back. She sat down across from the hooded figure without being invited, which caused an immediate ripple of reaction from the 4 people still at the table, a mix of surprise and the particular gratitude of spectators who sense that something interesting is about to happen. "Room for one more?" Rowan said. She wasn't asking. A silence settled over that section of the tavern. The music in the corner continued, but the people nearest the central table had all gone quiet. Rowan was aware of being looked at. She didn't care about being looked at. She cared about the pair of hands on the other side of the table, which had gone perfectly still. Then the hooded figure tilted his head, just slightly, just enough to suggest that he was reassessing something. And he said, in a voice that was low and measured and completely without tell, "Iron dice only. First to hold the highest accumulated roll across 5 throws. Stakes are your choosing. 10 silver on each throw," Rowan said. 50 total if it goes to 5. A soft sound from the other players. Half a gasp, half a laugh. 50 silver was serious money in Ashvin. It was a month of hard work for most people in this room. The hooded figure didn't react to the number at all. Agreed. He pushed the iron dice to the center of the table. Rowan looked at them for a moment. Then she took her bone dice out of her pocket and set them beside the iron ones. "Mine," she said. "Your call on the set." Another ripple. "You didn't bring your own dice to a stranger's table, thus it was considered both presumptuous and slightly insulting, an implication that you didn't trust the house dice. But more than that, it was a test. It was a way of saying, I have been doing this long enough that I travel with my own tools." The hooded figure looked at her dice for a long moment. Then, without a word, he slid the iron dice to the side and nodded at her bone ones. "He chose mine," Rowan noted. Either he doesn't think it matters, or he wants me to know he's confident enough not to care. Both possibilities were interesting. The game took 40 minutes, which felt like 4 years and also like no time at all. The first throw went to Rowan, the second to the hooded figure, the third was close, a difference of 2 points that caused the watching crowd, which had now grown to encompass most of the tavern, to exhale audibly. The fourth throw went to the hooded figure, and for the first time all evening, Rowan felt the particular cold clarity that came when she was genuinely challenged, when she was playing someone who wasn't making mistakes, which meant she couldn't rely on their mistakes to win. She had to be better. Read him, she told herself, not the dice. Him. She watched the hands. She watched the minimal tell of breathing, a slight slowing when he was confident, a barely perceptible quickening when he wasn't. She watched the way he held the dice before throwing, the particular grip that, across 4 throws, she'd catalogued without meaning to. On the 5th and final throw, Rowan changed her approach entirely. She didn't try to maximize her own role. She played for the probability spread, a technique she'd developed over years of playing in rooms where the odds were stacked against her, where the only way to win was to force a mistake rather than waiting for one. She threw. The dice tumbled across the table. The crowd counted. Someone near the back did it out loud, and when they reached the final number, there was a moment of complete silence. Rowan had won, by 4 points. The tavern erupted. She sat very still through the noise, watching the hooded figure across the table. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted to the crowd, to the shouting, to the 3 people who were already clapping her on the back. He was watching her with the absolute focused attention of someone encountering something they hadn't expected. He reached into his cloak and withdrew 50 silver coins, stacked them neatly on the table, and slid them toward her. "Well played," he said. "You pulled your last throw," Rowan said. The noise around them dropped a notch. She wasn't sure why she'd said it. It had simply come out because it was true, and she didn't see the point of pretending otherwise. He had, in the final moment, made a choice that gave him a slightly lower ceiling in exchange for a higher floor. It was a defensive play, the play of someone who was more concerned with not losing catastrophically than with winning completely. It was not, she reflected, the play of someone who desperately needed the money. The hooded figure was still for a moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Most people don't see that." "Most people are watching the dice," Rowan said. "I watched the player." Another silence. Different from the first one. This one had a quality of assessment in it that she didn't entirely understand and filed away for later. She took the coins. She stood up. She inclined her head in the formal acknowledgement that serious players gave each other after a match, regardless of outcome. "Good game," she said. She walked back to her corner, sat down, and ordered another drink with hands that were, she was pleased to note, perfectly steady. Around her, the tavern buzzed with the particular electric energy of a crowd that had just watched something unexpected. She listened to the conversations with half an ear, cataloging what people said about the hooded gambler, adding it to the picture she was building. Nobody knows who he is. He pays an old coin, the kind from the capital. His bodyguards outside the tavern are good. They didn't react to the game noise, which means they were trained to hold position. He doesn't drink, but he orders water. He's not here for the money. She turned the bone dice over in her fingers. Then why is he here? She didn't have an answer yet, but she'd learned, over 15 years of surviving on her wits, that the questions that didn't have immediate answers were usually the most important ones. She stayed 2 days in Ashvin. On the first day, she visited the market, sold some goods she'd been carrying for 3 settlements, and listened to the ambient conversation of the settlement the way she always did, absorbing the texture of local grievances, power structures, who owed what to whom. Frontier towns were like icebergs. The visible part was the one that got you killed, but it was the invisible 9/10 that told you how things actually worked. Ashvin, she gathered, was having a difficult season. There'd been trouble at the border. The official story was bandit raids, though the unofficial story, gathered from 2 separate conversations she'd had while appearing to be doing something else, involved a territorial dispute between a shifter pack and the settlement council that had been mishandled by someone in the capital's administrative structure. The settlement was paying taxes it couldn't afford on the theory that the crown would provide protection it wasn't providing. Same story, Rowan thought, different town. She'd heard some version of this in half the places she'd passed through. The frontier was a place where the crown's authority existed mainly as an abstraction, present enough to collect taxes, absent enough to be useless when things went wrong. On the second day, she was sitting in the market, eating a meat pie and watching a group of children play a simplified version of the dice game she'd played 2 nights before. Their stakes were pebbles. Their arguments over the rules were earnest and loud, when she became aware of being watched. It was not an aggressive watching. It was the particular quality of attention that she'd learned to distinguish from threat surveillance over the years. Not the watching of someone who meant her harm, but the watching of someone who was curious about her. She kept her eyes on the children and waited. After about 3 minutes, a figure settled onto the bench beside her. Not the hooded gambler, a different person, a young man with the compact efficiency of someone who moved for a living. A messenger, or a guard, or both. "The man from the broken wheel sends his regards," the young man said. Rowan bit into her pie. "Does he?" "He's heard you're looking for work." Rowan hadn't told anyone she was looking for work. She had, however, mentioned casually to the tavern keeper the previous morning that she was considering staying in the area for a few weeks if the right opportunity presented itself. The Frontier Information Network was nothing if not efficient. "What kind of work?" she said. "The castle," the young man said, "is taking on temporary staff for the next month. The harvest records need auditing. They're looking for someone who can count and who won't steal." Rowan looked at him finally. "He recommended me for a bookkeeping position. He said you had the kind of mind that catches things other people miss." The young man paused. "And that you were honest," which he said was rarer than the arithmetic. Rowan was quiet for a moment, turning the bone dice over in her fingers under the table where no one could see. It was a strange thing to do. Recommend a stranger for castle work. Stranger still that the recommendation came with a character assessment that was, as far as she could tell, accurate. "He's curious about me," she thought. "He wants me somewhere he can observe me." She should have found that unsettling. She had spent 15 years making herself the observer rather than the observed. Instead, she found herself thinking about the game, the 5 throws, the question she hadn't been able to answer. Why is he here? "The pay?" she said. The young man told her. It was fair, more than fair for a month's work. Rowan looked back at the children with their pebble stakes dice game, calculating rapidly and against her better instincts. "Tell him I'll consider it," she said. "Tut." She took the work. She told herself it was the money. She told herself it was the intelligence opportunity. Castle work gave you access to information, and information was currency more reliable than silver. She told herself a lot of things that were true, but not complete. The castle above Ashvin was not a grand structure. It was frontier architecture, built for function rather than impression, with thick walls and small windows and the general aesthetic of something that expected to be attacked periodically. But it was well maintained in a way that spoke of genuine care rather than performance, and the people who worked in it moved with a purposefulness that she recognized as the sign of an institution that actually functioned. She reported to the steward's office on the first morning, a small, efficient woman named Hessa, who looked at Rowan with the undisguised assessment of someone who'd been doing her job long enough to have very little patience for anything that wasted her time. "You've done accounts before?" Hessa said. "Not formally," Rowan said, "but I've managed the books for 3 different traveling merchants over the past 5 years, and I found errors in 2 of their records that saved them significant coin." "Found errors or made them?" "Found them," Rowan said. "The errors that were already there. I don't steal from people I'm working for. It's bad for long-term business." Hessa looked at her for a long moment. "The records are a mess. The previous auditor left mid-season under circumstances I'd rather not discuss. You'll have 2 weeks of backlog to sort through before you can even start on current accounts." "Fine. You'll work in the East Records Room. You'll have access to the public archive, but not the sealed treasury documents." "Fine. And you'll report to me directly, not to any of the castle staff who try to redirect you. There are several of them." Rowan read the subtext without difficulty. The castle had internal politics, the previous auditor had gotten tangled in them, and Hessa was trying to prevent a repeat. Understood. She was shown to the East Records Room, which was exactly as bad as advertised. Stacks of ledgers in no discernible organizational system, invoices stuffed between pages, a filing structure that appeared to have been designed by someone who found the concept of categories personally offensive. She stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the chaos with the same detached assessment she'd have given a difficult dice table. It's just a puzzle, she told herself. Bigger than usual, with worse handwriting. She took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and started. She had been working for 4 hours when the door opened. She didn't look up. She was in the middle of cross-referencing 3 separate invoices against a ledger entry that didn't match any of them, and the number in her head was fragile and would collapse if she interrupted it. "The entry in the second column is wrong," she said to whoever had come in. "The sum is off by 14 silver. If whoever you are wants to discuss anything, I'll be done with this in approximately 4 minutes." A silence. She finished the cross-reference, confirmed the discrepancy, marked it in the margin with a note, and looked up. The man standing in the doorway was tall, the kind of tall that came with breadth, a physical presence that filled a room without effort. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and the particular quality of stillness she'd noticed across a dice table 2 nights ago. He was dressed plainly, no insignia, no formal wear, the kind of deliberately unremarkable clothes that people wore when they wanted to be seen as ordinary. He was not ordinary. She had known, on some level, from the first second she looked up, that this was the hooded gambler. The hands, long-fingered, absolutely still, and the quality of attention behind his eyes were the same. She had the sudden, disorienting sensation of a puzzle piece clicking into place. He was watching her with what she could now recognize, in better light than the tavern had provided, as a kind of focused, genuine interest that was different from any way she'd been looked at before. Not appraising exactly, more like encountering. "The East Records room," he said, "hasn't had anyone in it who wasn't lost for about 6 months." "It shows," Rowan said. She looked back down at the ledger. "Are you here for a reason, or are you exploring?" "Bit of both," he said. "I don't do well with hovering," she said. "It breaks my concentration." "I'll keep that in mind," he said. She waited for him to leave. He didn't leave. She looked up again. "Is there something specific you need?" "I heard the new auditor was unusual," he said. "I was curious." "I am usual in every way that matters for accounting," Rowan said. "The numbers are unusual. I'm just looking at them." She paused, because something about the ease with which he occupied the space in her doorway, the absolute absence of any need to explain himself or justify being there, was telling her something she hadn't assembled yet. "Who are you?" "Aldrich," he said. "I'm with the household staff." It was not, she would eventually understand, a lie exactly. It was simply not the entire truth. "Aldrich," she repeated, filing it away. "If you're going to stand there, make yourself useful. There's a stack of invoices from 3 seasons back on the shelf to your left. They need to be sorted by date. Can you read a date stamp?" A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, she thought, followed by something that might have been amusement. "I can read a date stamp," he said. "Then start sorting." He sorted invoices for 2 hours. He was good at it. Not just competent, but actually systematic, which she hadn't entirely expected. He sorted without talking, which she appreciated, but when he did speak, it was to ask a question that demonstrated he'd understood the organizational structure she was building without being told what it was. "This one's misdated," he said at one point, holding up an invoice. "The goods on here weren't available in this region until the following spring. Someone backdated it." Rowan looked up. "How do you know when those goods became available in this region?" "I know supply routes," he said, with the same easy certainty he brought to everything. She studied him for a moment. Then she took the invoice and put it in the discrepancy pile she'd started, which was growing more quickly than she'd have liked. "Someone's been skimming," she said. "This isn't just disorganization." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The way he said it, flat, unsurprised, carrying a weight of prior knowledge, made her look at him differently for the first time. Not as an interloper or an assistant, but as someone who might actually know more about this situation than she did. "The steward knows?" she said. "Some of it. Whoever runs this place. Do they know?" Something in his expression shifted. More than they've been told, he said. Less than they should. That's a strange answer, she thought. She filed it, the way she filed everything, we said, carefully with a note attached. Return to this later. They worked until the light through the small windows had gone from afternoon gold to the gray of early evening. When Rowan finally sat back and stretched her hands, the East Records room was not fixed, but it was at least navigable. She could see the shape of what she was dealing with now, and that was always the hardest part. You didn't have to stay, she said. I know, Aldrich said. You're going to come back tomorrow, aren't you? It wasn't quite a question. He looked at her with that same quality of focused attention, and she had the disorienting experience of feeling, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely seen. Not assessed or evaluated or monitored for threat, but seen in the way that meant someone was paying attention to who you actually were rather than who they expected you to be. If that's not a problem, he said. Rowan considered this for approximately 2 seconds. Then she picked up her coat and her bag and walked past him toward the door. Bring the invoice box from the archive room on your way, she said. The dark green one on the second shelf. I need it first thing. She didn't wait to see his reaction, but she heard very quietly what might have been a low sound of genuine amusement in the hallway behind her. She didn't trust him. That was important to hold on to, because something about Aldrich, who sorted invoices and new supply routes, had the particular quality of a person who made it easy to forget you didn't trust him. He was easy to be around in the way that some people were. Not charming, exactly, or rather not charming in the practiced, performative way that Rowan had learned to recognize and deflect. He was simply present without demanding anything, which was so rare in her experience that she found herself more than once over the following days having to consciously remember that every person she'd ever known had wanted something. He came back the next day with the invoice box, as requested, and the day after that without being asked. He didn't explain himself, and she didn't ask him to, because asking would have meant engaging with the question of why he was there, and she had enough to do. She had found by the end of the first week 3 separate skimming operations in the records, 1 large, 2 smaller, and a systematic pattern of falsified invoices that suggested a level of organization that made her distinctly uneasy. This wasn't opportunistic theft. Someone had built a system. Tell me about the castle's procurement officers, she said on the 5th day. Tell me what you found first, Aldrich said. She looked up from the ledger. That's not how information works. It is when the information is about potential suspects and you're someone I haven't verified yet. Fair, she thought, which annoyed her because she'd have given the same answer, and it was easier to be annoyed when someone gave you a bad answer. There are 3, she said. Procurement officers. I can tell that from the record signatures. 2 of the skimming operations have consistent handwriting that I can attribute to one of them. The 3rd is different. Damn bum. Son, the hand is better, and they've been more careful about covering their tracks. But whoever it is, they know the supply routes well enough to make the falsifications plausible. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. The one you're describing, he said, has been with the castle for 9 years. That's a long time to be careful, Rowan said. Yes, he said, it is. She waited. He seemed to be making a decision about something. She recognized the quality of the pause, the internal calculus of trust, of how much to reveal, of what the cost was of speaking versus staying silent. The large skimming operation has been running for at least 3 years, he said finally. There have been 2 previous attempts to audit the records. Both auditors left before finishing. You said under circumstances you'd rather not discuss. I didn't say that. Hessa did. You knew what she meant. Yes. Rowan set down her pen. Am I in danger? He looked at her directly. No deflection, no reassurance that she hadn't asked for. Potentially, he said. Anyone who gets close to that 3rd operation is. She sat with that for a moment, assessed it the way she assessed any risk, without drama, with precision. She had been in dangerous situations before. She had a system for those too. Calculate, adapt, execute. Why are you telling me? Because you're going to find it anyway, Aldrich said. And you should know what you're walking toward. She looked at him for a long moment. The quality of his stillness, the directness of his answers when he chose to give them, The way he moved through the castle like someone who owned it, not arrogantly, but with a groundedness that didn't need to announce itself. "Who are you?" she thought, really. She didn't ask. Not yet. "I'll need a candle brought to the lower archive," she said instead. "The lamp brackets down there are empty." "I'll have it sent," he said. "The supply records from 6 seasons back," she continued. "Are those sealed or available?" "Available." A pause. "I'll get them for you." "You don't know where—" "I know where they are," he said. She watched him go, bone dice turning over in her fingers under the table. "You know where everything is," she thought. "You know the supply routes. You know the sealed and unsealed documents. You know what happened to the previous auditors. You dress like household staff, and you sort invoices like a man doing a favor, and you speak like someone who's never had to explain himself to anyone. Who does that?" Outside the small window of the East Records room, the frontier sky was going dark. That same bruise-colored dark she'd seen over Ashfin when she rode in. Storm potential that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to do. Rowan had lived 15 years on the road by knowing when something was bigger than it looked. She was beginning to suspect that this, all of this, was much, much bigger than it looked. She turned to a new page in her ledger, dated it, and started writing down everything she'd noticed. Every detail, every anomaly, every question without an answer. It was, she had found, the only reliable way to keep from being surprised. On the 9th day, she found the ledger that changed everything. It was in the back of a locked cabinet in the lower archive. Not hidden well, just hidden badly. The way things got hidden when someone trusted that nobody would bother looking this far down. The lock had yielded to the set of picks she'd been carrying since she was 16, and inside the cabinet was a single ledger, unremarkable on the outside, devastating on the inside. 3 years of systematic diversion, not just skimming, wholesale rerouting of resources that were supposed to go to the frontier settlements. Food supplies. Defense materials. Payment for contracted border guards who had never been paid, which explained, with horrible clarity, the shortage of protection that the settlements had been complaining about while paying for it. People had died for this. Were probably still dying for it, in the cold and the raids and the undefended nights at the edge of the territory. Rowan sat on the stone floor of the lower archive with the ledger in her lap and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Rage. Clean, cold, structural rage. Not the hot kind that made you stupid, but the kind that clarified things. She was still sitting there when footsteps came down the stairs. She didn't look up. She recognized the particular rhythm of Aldrich's walk by now, the even, unhurried quality of it. "I found it," she said. He came and crouched beside her, reading over her shoulder in silence. She felt him go still. A different stillness than usual. Something deeper. "People have been paying for protection they weren't getting," she said. Her voice was flat because she'd put the rage somewhere useful. "Border settlements, how many?" 14, he said. "How long has someone at the capital level known about this?" A pause. "Tell me," she said. "Exactly." 6 months, he said. "There have been complications. The network goes higher than the castle, untangling it without triggering the rest of the operation. People are dying," Rowan said, "on the frontier, in settlements exactly like Ashfin that are paying for guards who never show up. 6 months is a long time for someone to be doing the right calculation about complications." Aldrich was quiet. She looked at him for the first time since he'd come downstairs. His face was doing something complicated, some internal reckoning happening behind the stillness. "I know," he said. It was not, she recognized, a defensive statement. It was the statement of someone who knew they'd made the wrong choice and had been living with that knowledge, and for whom having someone name it aloud was both painful and necessary. She looked back at the ledger. "I'm going to finish the audit," she said, "all of it. And then I'm going to write up a complete account and give it to Hessa. And after that, it's someone else's problem." She paused. Unless whoever is responsible has already taken steps to make sure this particular auditor also leaves before finishing. "They won't," Aldrich said. Quiet. Definitive. She looked at him again. "I'll make sure of it," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, reading him the way she read every player at a table, looking for the tells, the fractures, the places where the performance broke down and the real person showed through. She found certainty. Not the performed certainty of a man making a promise he hoped he could keep, but the structural certainty of a man who knew exactly what authority he had and was, in that moment, deciding to use it. "Who are you?" she thought again. The question had a different weight to it now, a different urgency. The lower archive was cold and dim and smelled of old paper and damp stone, and outside the frontier sky was doing its perpetual threat and promise routine, and Rowan Vale, who trusted no one, was sitting on the floor of a castle basement with a ledger that could bring down people she hadn't identified yet, next to a man whose real name she strongly suspected was not Aldrich. She made a decision, not to trust him, not yet, but to keep paying attention. She was 11 days into her castle work when she made a mistake. It was a small mistake, the kind that came not from stupidity, but from the particular combination of exhaustion and overfocus that crept up on people who'd been working too hard for too long. She'd been in the archive until well past midnight, and when she left, she took her usual route out through the castle's east passage, which led onto a side road through the woods that led back to the staff quarters where she'd been housed. She should have varied her route. She knew to vary her route. She'd done it every other day. She'd been too tired to think about it. She was 20 minutes into the wood road when she heard the footsteps behind her. 3 of them, moving too deliberately to be random, spaced the way people spaced themselves when they had a job to do and had done it before. Old debt was her first thought, gambling feud. She'd crossed the wrong people, 2 settlements back, in a game that had gotten complicated, and she'd been watching her back ever since. But watching was different from being found, and she'd let herself get complacent. She didn't run. Running in a wood at night with 3 people who knew this terrain better than she did was suicide. She kept walking, keeping her pace even, while her mind ran the calculations. 3 of them. She had a knife. The trees were close enough that she could use them, but she'd have to move before they closed the distance, and she didn't know yet which direction they'd cut off. The first blow came from the left, which she hadn't anticipated because the footsteps had all been behind her, which meant there'd been a 4th positioned ahead. 4, she corrected, as the world tilted sideways. She went down hard, got back up harder, got her knife out, and made them work for it. She always made people work for it. It was a matter of pride and also practical necessity, because the longer she fought, the more noise she made, and the more chance someone else would hear. But there were 4 of them, and she'd been dealt a bad opening, and the second blow caught her across the ribs with something heavy, and then the world did a long, bad, spinning thing, and the floor of the forest came up to meet her, and the cold of the October ground was the last thing she registered before the dark closed in. I should have varied the route, she thought, distantly, as everything went quiet. The dice, she reflected, were not always in your favor. Sometimes you just had to survive the throw. She didn't know, as the darkness took her, that a mile away, a large wolf had stopped mid-stride on a hillside overlooking the forest. Didn't know that his head had lifted, sharp and sudden, toward the tree line below. Didn't know that he stood motionless for a single breath, 2, and then broke into a run. The wolf ran like purpose given form, silent and absolute toward the cold dark of the trees. The wolf ran like the forest owed him a debt. He moved through the trees with the particular velocity of something that had decided, in the space of a single breath on a dark hillside, that speed was the only variable that mattered. The undergrowth tore past him in ribbons of shadow. The cold October air carried scent the way water carried current, layered, directional, brutally informative. Blood. 4 humans. Fear. Not the participants' fear, but the ambient fear smell that violence left on the air like smoke after a fire, the chemical signature of something gone wrong. And underneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, the particular scent he'd been cataloging, without entirely meaning to, for 11 days. He found her in a clearing 40 feet off the wood road. She was on the ground, which was wrong. He had not, in 11 days of watching her move through the castle with the unhurried precision of someone who knew exactly where she was going at all times, ever seen her on the ground except when she chose to be. The 4 men who had put her there were still present, which was a miscalculation on their part. They had apparently assumed, as people often did when they encountered a large wolf in a dark forest, that standing their ground was an option. It was not an option. The pack emerged from the trees a half-second behind him. 3 wolves, moving in the coordinated silence of long practice. The 4 men made the noise that humans made when the situation reclassified itself from assault to something else entirely, and then they ran, which was the correct instinct, if somewhat late. He let 2 of his pack handle the pursuit. He shifted, the change moving through him like a tide, fast and practiced, and crossed the clearing to where she lay. She was breathing. That was the first thing he checked, and the relief of it was sharper than he expected. Breathing, but wrong. The shallow, guarded breathing of someone with damaged ribs, and when he turned her carefully, the blood at her temple was too much. The pallor of her face in the moonlight was too pronounced, and he had the specific cold clarity of a man who was doing the arithmetic and finding the numbers bad. Rowan. He said her name the way he'd said it in his head for 11 days, quietly, without any particular announcement. Rowan, can you hear me? Her eyes moved under closed lids. Not unconscious, then, somewhere in the difficult territory between. Don't. Her voice was a wreck of itself, thin and effortful. Don't touch. I'm going to move you, he said. You can argue with me about it when you're capable of winning the argument. A sound that might, in better circumstances, have been a laugh. That's a sharp breath. Terrible bedside manner. I've been told. He got an arm under her carefully, and she went rigid with pain, and then, with what he recognized as the particular deliberate effort of someone overriding their own instincts, forced herself to go still. How bad is it? Ribs, she said. 2, maybe 3. Head. A pause. How did you find me? He didn't answer that. Not yet. Can you stand? I can always stand, she said, with a conviction that was approximately 60% accurate based on the evidence. But she proved herself right anyway, getting her legs under her with his arm as the one external variable, and standing and staying standing through what was visibly an act of will rather than physical capability. She looked at him. The moonlight was adequate. He could see the moment she processed what she was looking at. The shift of his clothing, the way he'd come out of the trees, the complete absence of anything that could explain how he'd gotten here in time, unless he'd been considerably closer than any household staff member had any reason to be at this hour of this night. How did you find me? She said again. Not a question this time. The flat tone of someone building a new model and not liking where it was pointing. I'll explain, he said. Later. Right now, I need to get you inside. Later, she repeated. Her eyes were doing the thing he'd watched them do across a dice table and over invoices and through 11 days of conversations that had been, on her end, a sustained exercise in information gathering, moving, cataloging, drawing conclusions at a speed that most people didn't operate at. Later means there's something to explain that you don't want to explain right now. Rowan, he kept his voice level. You're bleeding. I'm aware, she said. I'm also standing here having this conversation, which should tell you something about my priorities. But she was pale, and the hand she had pressed against her ribs was trembling slightly with the effort of holding still, and whatever the argument she was building in her head, her body was having a different conversation. He made a decision. I'm going to carry you, he said. You're going to hate it. Do it anyway. He didn't wait for permission. He picked her up. She made a sound of pure indignation that briefly overpowered the pain sounds and started moving. This, she said, with remarkable coherence for someone in her condition, is the second time in 2 weeks you've done something without asking me first. I'll add it to the list, he said. She was quiet for a moment, which he suspected cost her more than the talking did. The men, she said, the ones who... My pack is handling them. Another silence. A longer one. Your pack, she said. He didn't answer. She didn't ask again, but he felt her hand, which had been braced against his chest for balance, go very still in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain. She was thinking. Even now, even like this, she was thinking. He walked faster. He brought her to the castle's east infirmary rather than the public physician's quarters, which was a decision he made in about 3 seconds, and which had several implications he was prepared to deal with in sequence. The infirmary's night attendant, a steady woman named Petra, who had been with the castle long enough to have stopped being surprised by most things, took one look at Rowan, another look at him, and asked no questions. This was one of the things he valued about Petra. Ribs and a head wound, he said. Possible deeper damage to the ribs. I couldn't assess fully. She was conscious throughout. Still am, Rowan said, from the cot where she'd been lowered with rather less indignation than the carrying had generated, possibly because lying down was considerably more appealing than she'd expected it to be. Petra examined her with efficient hands. Rowan submitted to this with the tightly controlled patience of someone who found physical vulnerability deeply inconvenient, and he stood near the door and watched and did not examine too closely the quality of what he was feeling, which had several components and was not simple. 2 ribs, Petra said after a few minutes. Cracked, not broken. The difference matters. The head wound needs cleaning and a few stitches. She'll be sore for 2 weeks, but there's no deep damage if she rests. She looked at Rowan with the directness of long professional practice. You'll rest. I have records to... You'll rest, Petra repeated in the tone of someone who had said this to people with considerably more authority than a temporary castle auditor and had prevailed in every instance. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then she looked across the room at him, past Petra, directly at him, and her eyes were doing the assessment thing again, but slower now, with the particular quality of someone who has temporarily suspended one line of inquiry to focus on another. Go away, she said. Both of you. One at a time. Petra raised an eyebrow. I'm not finished. You're finished for now, Rowan said. Come back in 10 minutes. I need to speak to him. Petra looked at him. He nodded once. She gathered her supplies with the pointed efficiency of someone making a statement about being interrupted and left. The infirmary door closed. Rowan looked at him in the quiet for a moment. The lamp on the wall threw its light sideways across her face, catching the pallor and the dried blood at her temple and the particular expression she was wearing, which was not the expression of someone in pain so much as the expression of someone who had been running calculations for 40 minutes and had arrived at a conclusion they needed to verify. Tell me who you are, she said. Not Aldrich from the household staff. Who you actually are. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her cot. The wooden chair that was there for visitors, which he had sat in so few times over the years that the gesture felt, in some obscure way, significant. He looked at her for a moment. The bone-cut cheekbones, the direct eyes, the absolute refusal to soften her gaze even now, even like this. He had spent 11 days finding reasons to be in the East Records room. He had told himself it was intelligence. She was finding the corruption in the castle records that his own people hadn't been able to untangle, and he needed to know what she found and in what order. He had told himself it was oversight. She was an unknown quantity in a sensitive operation, and it was prudent to keep her close. He had spent 11 days lying to himself with the particular dedication of a man who suspects the truth is going to be inconvenient. My name is Alaric, he said. He watched her absorb this, watched the specific, rapid reassessment that moved across her face as the name landed, because his name was not unknown, not even on the frontier, not even to someone who had been deliberately avoiding the kind of stable existence that would bring her into contact with formal structures of power. Alaric, she said. Thorn, he said, which was, as far as he was concerned, the less relevant part. But context mattered. She was quiet. The lamp guttered slightly in a draft from the window. Outside, the frontier night was doing its usual thing, dark and cold, and full of things moving at the edges of visibility. He had spent so much of his life in rooms like this one, in the dark margins of his own kingdom, that the familiarity of it was almost comfortable. The hooded gambler, she said. Yes. In the broken wheel. A pause. You come to frontier taverns. To hear the truth, he said. The capital tells me what people think I want to hear. The frontier tells me what's actually happening. He kept his voice even because this was not a new explanation. He'd given it before to the small number of people who knew about the visits. And he believed it, had always believed it. But saying it to her in this room, with the particular quality of attention she was giving him, made it feel like it needed to be examined. And the records room, she said. 11 days. You were finding things my own auditors couldn't find. So you watched me work. Something moved through her voice, not quite anger, not yet. Something more controlled than anger, but with the potential for it underneath. For 11 days, while I thought you were household staff. Yes. And you knew who I was. I knew you were the woman who beat me at dice, he said, which, for context, is something that has happened twice in my life. Don't flatter me, she said. I'm not in the mood. But something in her expression shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly, in the direction of someone receiving information that they're filing away rather than discarding. The corruption in the records, she said. You knew. I knew some of it, not the extent, not the third operation, not with evidence. A pause. You found the evidence. In 11 days, she said, that your people couldn't find. Yes, because they were looking in the right places. He didn't follow this immediately. Then he did. The organized places, he said. The disorganized ones, she said. Nobody puts incriminating evidence somewhere organized. The locked cabinet in the lower archive looked like neglect. It was actually the most logical hiding place in the building, if you were someone who understood that the most dangerous documents get hidden in plain sight inside chaos. She paused. Your people would have cleaned up the archive. I worked with the chaos instead of against it. He looked at her. The particular quality of intelligence she was describing, the ability to work with a system rather than trying to impose order on it, was not common. He had met a great many intelligent people in his life. He had met very few who thought structurally. What are you going to do with it? She said. The information, now that you have it with evidence. Move against the people responsible, he said. Carefully. The network extends into the capital administration. Acting without full information would let the outer structure collapse while the core survived. How long? Weeks, possibly a month. And in the meantime, the frontier settlements will have additional protection, he said, directly from the crown, bypassing the compromised procurement chain. It should have been done 6 months ago. He paused. You were right about that. Earlier, in the archive, someone did the wrong calculation. She looked at him for a long moment. Reading him, he knew. The same way she'd read him across a dice table, the way she read everything, the slow, patient accumulation of data that she then assembled into a picture with an accuracy that was, frankly, unsettling. The men tonight, she said, the ones who attacked me. Connected to the third procurement officer, he said. You got too close. He moved to stop the audit. So he tried to kill me, she said. She said it with the flat precision of someone reporting a weather event. Not shock. She had already gotten there herself, he understood. She'd had 40 minutes of semi-consciousness in a cold wood to do the math. And you knew the risk existed. Yes. You said you'd make sure I was safe. I did. You followed me. I was already watching the wood road, he said. I had people on the eastern approach since the 4th day. She stared at him. Since the 4th day. You were finding things faster than I expected, he said. The risk to you escalated faster than... You had people watching me, she said, for a week, without telling me there was a threat. The room had the particular quality of pressure that preceded a storm. Not external weather, but the internal weather of two people in a small space where something was being decided. He had been in enough difficult conversations to recognize the type. This one had the added complexity of being, he was finding, a conversation he could not manage the way he managed most difficult conversations, by being patient and deliberate and slightly more composed than the situation warranted, because she was not responding to composure. She was responding to truth, and the truth, in this case, was not entirely comfortable. I made the wrong call, he said. She looked at him. The directness of it, unbroken, assessing, would have been uncomfortable for most people. He found it inconveniently the opposite. You could have told me, she said. I've spent 15 years managing my own risks. I'm considerably better at it than the average person. If you had told me the threat was active, I would not have taken the wood road tonight. You varied your route every other day, he said. I thought, you thought, she said, without asking me, again. He was quiet. Right, she said. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. The particular look of someone resetting, recalibrating, refusing to let emotion make decisions that logic should make. He recognized it because he did the same thing. He recognized it, in fact, with the jolt of recognition that came from seeing something familiar in an unexpected place. The man who attacked me tonight. The third procurement officer. Gareth Solon, he said, 9 years with the castle. You were right about the timeline. He'll try again, she said. He won't, Alaric said. He's in custody. My pack brought him in an hour ago. A pause. That's why I needed the evidence before moving. With it, the arrest holds. Without it, his connections in the capital would have had him released inside a week. She processed this. Then, the audit. The audit stands, he said. Your findings will be used in the formal proceedings. I want to finish it, she said. Myself, all the way through. He looked at her. You have cracked ribs. I'm aware, she said for the second time that night. I'll work seated. I am very good at working seated. I want to finish what I started. She said it with the matter-of-fact simplicity of someone who had spent 15 years finishing things because there was no one else to finish them. No fallback, no safety net, just the work and the person doing it, and the understanding that leaving things incomplete was how you ended up in worse situations later. He felt something that he didn't have a clean word for, something in the vicinity of respect, but larger than that. Respect was what you had for a general after a battle. This was something more immediate. The response to watching someone hurt and exhausted and operating in a situation that had just revealed itself to be considerably more complicated than they'd signed on for, simply decide to keep going. All right, he said. She looked at him. All right. You can finish the audit, he said, with 2 conditions. Her expression shifted into the particular configuration that meant she was about to decline to accept conditions. First, he said, before she could, you take 3 days before going back to the records room. Your ribs need time. 2 days, she said. 3. 2.5. Something happened to his face that he suspected was not entirely in keeping with the gravity of the situation. Second, he said, you tell me the routes you're using, every time, from now on. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp threw its light across her face, and he watched her calculate. Not the cost of the conditions, but something larger. The cost of a situation in which the person who had been watching over her without her knowledge was the same person who had beaten her at dice and sorted her invoices and spoken to her with a directness that nobody in this castle, in his experience, managed to sustain in his actual presence. 3 days, she said. And the routes. Yes. And you tell me things, she said. When there's information I need to do my job without getting killed, you tell me. Yes, he said, even when it's inconvenient. Even then. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the door. You can send Petra back in now. He stood. He moved to the door. He had his hand on the latch when her voice came from behind him, quieter than before. Not soft exactly, because he was not sure she had soft in her usual register, but lower. Alaric Thorne, she said. He stopped. You picked my dice, she said, at the broken wheel. You could have called for the iron set and you chose mine. Why? He turned back. She was looking at him with the particular focused quality of someone asking the question they've been saving, the one that goes underneath all the others. Because they were yours, he said. And I wanted to see what you'd do when the advantage you'd built disappeared. A pause. That was the tell, she said. I knew something was off about the choice. I couldn't figure out what. And now? She turned the bone dice over in her fingers. He hadn't noticed until that moment that she still had them, that she'd been holding them this entire time in the hand that wasn't braced against her ribs. The same gesture he'd watched her make in the East Records room without knowing he was watching. Now I'm going to sleep, she said, and in the morning I'm going to start deciding what to do about the fact that I've been working for the king for 11 days without knowing it. That seems reasonable, he said. Go away, Alaric Thorne, she said. He went. The 3 days were, in the assessment of every person who observed them, not exactly restful. Rowan spent the first day in the infirmary, which she submitted to with what Petra described later as technically compliance, and that she did not leave the building, but she did receive every piece of paperwork that was available to her and organized it across her cot, in a system that occupied approximately 4/5 of the room's available flat surface. When Petra came to check on her at midday and found her surrounded by invoices, she made a sound of profound disapproval and was met with a look of such complete unruffled calm that she gave up and brought an extra lamp. On the second day, Rowan moved to a chair in the east corridor, which was close enough to the records room that she could direct the young archive assistant, a nervous boy named Colum, who had been assigned to help her and was operating under the visible stress of someone trying to be efficient in the presence of a person who had very high standards for efficiency. In retrieving specific documents, she couldn't do the detailed work yet, but she could build the structure she'd need when she went back in. She did not see Alaric on either of these days. She told herself this was straightforward. She had information she needed to absorb, a situation she needed to recalibrate to, and she did not require anyone's company to do that. She had spent 15 years not requiring company. The information, when she examined it dispassionately, was this. The man she'd been working beside for 11 days was the ruler of the territory she was currently sitting in. He had concealed this while assessing her, which was a reasonable thing for a monarch to do with an unknown quantity in a sensitive situation. He had also arranged for her protection without telling her, which she was less certain about. It had worked, but the principle of it bothered her in a way she hadn't finished thinking through yet. He had, twice, made decisions about her situation without consulting her. He had also, twice, been correct. This was the part she found most unsettling. She could work with incompetence. She had built a career around working with other people's incompetence. Competence, genuine, structural competence, the kind that moved through a situation with the same economy she tried to move through everything was harder to maintain her defenses against because her defenses were built substantially on the premise that she was better at this than everyone else. Alaric Thorne was not, she was forced to conclude, worse at this than her. He was differently good at it, which was a category she hadn't had to manage before. She was turning this over in her mind on the second evening, seated in the east corridor with a lamp and a stack of date-sorted invoices, when footsteps came down the hall from the direction of the main keep. She knew them immediately. She had been cataloging them for 11 days. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. "Records room is locked," he said. "I know," she said. "I have the key." A pause. "You're not supposed to be working." "I'm not working," she said. "I'm organizing." She looked at him directly. "There's a difference. Organizing is passive. It requires almost no physical exertion." He looked at the stack of invoices in her lap, the lamp at her elbow, the 3 neat piles she'd built against the wall, and his expression did the thing it sometimes did, something that happened below the level of his usual control, a shift that made him look briefly like a different person, less composed, more present. "How are the ribs?" he said. "Present," she said. "I'm pretending they're not. It's working moderately well." He came and sat across from her, not in a chair, just onto the floor, which was not what she expected and which reconfigured the conversation somehow. They were at the same level now. It occurred to her that she wasn't sure she'd ever seen him sit on a floor. She found that she had no system for the small facts about him because she'd been filing him under household staff, identity pending, and now needed to reopen all of it under a different heading. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me several," she said. "I'm not sure where to start." "The taverns," he said. "Start there if you want. It's the simplest." "The simplest," she repeated. "A king who dresses in a plain cloak and sits in frontier taverns losing money at dice." "Winning, usually," he said. "Until recently." "You weren't losing money. You were spending it. On information." He looked at her. "Yes." "And when someone beats you, I find it interesting," he said. "It's happened twice. The first time, the person who beat me turned out to be cheating, which was useful information of a different kind. The second time," he paused, "was you, and you weren't cheating." "I never cheat," she said, with the particular conviction of someone for whom this was a genuine principle rather than a practical limitation. "I know," he said. "That was the interesting part." She looked at him in the lamplight, the dark hair, the stillness, The hands that she now understood belonged to a man who spent a significant portion of his time in a form that didn't have hands at all, and who had shifted back and run through a dark forest in October to find her. She had been building the picture of him for 11 days, and now she had a new axis to organize it around. And the picture it made was considerably more complicated and considerably more— She reached for the word and found it, reluctantly, compelling than the one she'd been building before. "Why did you recommend me for the castle work?" she said. "Because you were the right person for the job," he said, "and because I wanted to know what you'd do with access to the records." "Those are two separate reasons." "Yes." "One of them is about the job," she said. "The other is about me." He looked at her without deflecting. "Yes," he said. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the castle's far wing, she could hear the distant sounds of the evening, the shift change of the watch, the routine noise of a building that never entirely went to sleep. The lamplight was steady. Outside the windows, the frontier night had settled into the particular cold clarity that came after a storm. The sky swept clean, the stars very bright and very far away. "I need to ask you something," she said. "All right. The audit. When I finish it, when I deliver the full report, what happens to me?" He was still for a moment. Reading the question beneath the question, she thought, the one she hadn't quite asked, which was, "When this is over, do I go back to being a drifter who happened to wander through, or is there something else?" She didn't know, herself, what answer she was hoping for. She'd been telling herself for 3 days that she wasn't hoping for any particular answer, that she was assessing, that she was doing the calculation, and any answer was equally acceptable, so long as it was the true one. She was forced to admit, not entirely sure this was accurate. "That depends on you," he said. "On me." "There's work here," he said, "if you want it. Not just the audit. The underlying financial structure of the Frontier Administration needs rebuilding from the ground up. And there's no one in the castle who can do what you've done in 2 weeks. A pause. "And there's—" He stopped. She waited. "There's something else," he said, "which I'm not going to frame as work, because it isn't." He held her gaze. "I find that I want you to stay." She was quiet for a long moment, turning the bone dice over in her fingers. "That's a different thing to say," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is. You've known me 11 days. 12, he said, "including tonight." She looked at the dice. They were smooth from years of handling. Her mother's, inherited along with the habit of turning them in her fingers when she was thinking, a habit she'd tried to break 3 times over the years and given up on because it was too deeply structural. She turned them over now with the particular attention she gave to things she needed to examine carefully. "I'll finish the audit," she said. "Then I'll decide." "Fair," he said. "I'm not making decisions about staying in one place based on 11 days of anything," she said. "I have a system for this. The system requires more information." "What information?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's why I need more of it." Something happened to his expression. The thing that made him look like a different person, less managed, more present. She was starting to recognize it. She didn't have a name for it yet. "3 days is almost up," he said, nodding at the invoice stack. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "I'm going back in. Colum will be there at dawn." "Tell Colum to bring coffee," she said. "The real kind. Not whatever they've been giving me in the infirmary." He stood, and she noted, cataloging it along with everything else, that the gesture had none of the visible effort it would have had for most people who'd just been sitting on a stone floor in a cold corridor. He moved like water found its level, with complete inevitability, no wasted energy. "Rowan," he said. She looked up. "The dice game," he said. "In the broken wheel, you said I pulled my last throw." "You did. Why do you think I did that?" She looked at him. The question had a quality to it that she'd noticed before in his conversation, the quality of a question that already has an answer, that is being asked not because the asker doesn't know, but because they want to see if you do. "Because you weren't there to win," she said. "You were there to see what it looked like when someone tried to beat you. You can't do that if you crush them in the first 3 throws." She paused. "You wanted the game to last long enough to tell you something." He looked at her for a moment. And did it? She said. Yes, he said. What did it tell you? He picked up the lamp from the floor beside her and held it out. A practical gesture, an offer of light for the walk back to her quarters, and also, she understood, an answer in a different register to the question she'd just asked. She took it. She walked back to her quarters with the lamp in one hand and the bone dice in the other. And she did not look back, because she had learned a very long time ago that looking back was how you missed what was in front of you. Behind her, in the darkened corridor, the frontier castle settled into its nighttime rhythms. In the morning, she would go back to the records. In the morning, she would finish what she'd started. What came after that? She would decide when she had more information. She was very good, she reminded herself, at waiting for the right moment to play her hand. The bone dice were warm from her fingers. She kept walking. She finished the audit in 6 days. Not the 3 weeks Hesse had originally estimated. Not the month that the previous auditor, both previous auditors as it turned out, had failed to complete. 6 days, working from dawn until the lamp oil ran low, with Colum bringing coffee at intervals that she'd trained him to time correctly by the third morning, and the bone dice turning over in her fingers during the thinking hours when the numbers needed to settle before she could write them down. The final report was 43 pages. It named 4 people directly, outlined the structure of the operation, provided evidence chains for each falsified invoice, and included, because she was thorough by nature and because she had found, once she was looking, that the rot went deeper than anyone had told her, 2 additional procurement irregularities that hadn't been part of anyone's original investigation. She delivered it to Hesse on a Tuesday morning, placed it on the steward's desk without ceremony, and said, "Page 31 has the most urgent items. The rest can be read in order." Hesse looked at the report, then at Rowan, then at the report again, in the way of someone recalibrating a significant assumption. "This is complete?" Hesse said. "Completely complete," Rowan said, "including the appendix, which most people will find boring, but which is the part that will hold up in a formal proceeding. It's been 6 days." "I'm aware." Hesse was quiet for a moment. "The previous auditor was here for 3 months," she said. "The previous auditor was organizing the records before reading them," Rowan said. "I read them first. The organization followed the content." Another silence. Then Hesse did something that Rowan suspected she did rarely. She smiled. It was a small, restrained smile, the kind that people produced when something had happened that they hadn't allowed themselves to hope for. "I'll send this up this morning," Hesse said. "Page 31 first," Rowan said, and left. Oh, she expected after that the nature of her situation would clarify. She had completed the work. The question she'd posed to herself, "What happens to me when this is over?" had an answer pending, and she told herself, equally prepared for any of the reasonable answers. What she had not prepared for was the castle's court. She had been, for 3 weeks, effectively invisible in the way that working staff were invisible, present in the castle, moving through its corridors, doing her job, but not part of the social machinery that operated in the upper floors. The court was a different world from the East Records Room. It had its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own particular brand of warfare that was conducted with tone and implication rather than knives, though Rowan had always found the distinction largely cosmetic. On the Thursday after she delivered the report, she was summoned. Not explicitly. There was no formal summons, no letter with a seal. Instead, she was met in the East Corridor by a woman she hadn't seen before, tall, immaculately dressed, with the posture of someone who had been trained to fill a room from the moment they entered it. Lady Vessa Crane, she would later learn, was the castle's chief political advisor, which was a formal title for a role that functioned primarily as the mechanism by which the court communicated its displeasure with things that had been allowed to happen. "You're the auditor," Lady Vessa said, in a tone that achieved the remarkable feat of making the word sound like both a description and an accusation. "I was," Rowan said. "The audit is complete." "Quite." Lady Vessa looked her over with the practiced efficiency of someone performing an assessment that she had already completed before the conversation started. "The king has spoken highly of your work." "I'm glad the work was useful," Rowan said, keeping her voice entirely neutral. "He's also spoken highly of you," Lady Vessa said, "which is a different thing." Rowan met her gaze and held it. Is there something you needed from me, Lady Crane? Something moved behind Lady Vessa's careful expression. Not quite displeasure, more like the recalibration of someone who had expected a different kind of target and was adjusting her approach. The court has noted your extended presence in the castle, she said. It's been 3 weeks. The original engagement was for 1 month, but given the accelerated completion, I'm aware the engagement was for 1 month, Rowan said. I've been asked to stay on in a different capacity. I'm considering it. A different capacity, Lady Vessa repeated. The 2 words carried an entire secondary conversation inside them. Questions she wasn't asking, implications she was very carefully not stating. Administrative, Rowan said. The financial structure of the Frontier Administration needs rebuilding. Someone has to do it. Indeed, Lady Vessa said. Someone. A pause that lasted precisely long enough to be meaningful without being undeniable. The court takes an interest naturally in who occupies positions of influence. Near the king. Rowan was quiet for a moment. She looked at Lady Vessa with the same patience she'd give a complex ledger entry, reading the structure of what was being said, the places where it didn't add up, the motivation underneath the surface argument. Lady Crane, she said, I've spent 15 years in frontier settlements where people said what they meant because they didn't have the energy for anything else. I find I've never developed a taste for the other kind. She kept her tone completely even. If there's something you'd like to say to me directly, I'm listening. Lady Vessa looked at her for a long, measuring moment. You're not from a court background, she said finally. No. You don't have family connections, political alliances, or social capital of any kind within the structures that matter here. Also no. The king is… Lady Vessa paused, choosing words with the precision of someone navigating a field they'd mapped very carefully. In a position where his choices are observed and interpreted by many people with many interests, someone without the appropriate background, near to him in any capacity, creates complications. I imagine, Rowan said, that most things worth doing create complications. She picked up the bag she'd set down at the start of the conversation. I'll bear your concerns in mind. She walked away. She felt Lady Vessa's gaze on her back for the entire length of the corridor, and she did not alter her pace. That, she thought, as she turned the corner, is what the inside of a court looks like. She had spent 15 years learning to read rooms. She had just read this one. And what she'd found inside it, the layer of machinery underneath the surface, the way that power organized itself not around competence but around position, the specific kind of opposition that came not from malice but from the territorial instinct of people who had built their worlds around a system that a person like her didn't fit into, was something she'd have to think about carefully. The bone dice turned in her fingers. She was still thinking about it that evening when Alaric found her in the east corridor, in her usual chair with an unusual stillness about her that he apparently read correctly, because he sat down across from her without saying anything and waited. Lady Crane came to see me today, she said. I know, he said. I heard. She told me I don't belong here. She told you your presence creates complications, he said. Which is true. It's also true of most things I care about. He held her gaze. What did you tell her? That things worth doing create complications, Rowan said, and that I'd bear her concerns in mind. Something happened in his expression. And have you? Borne them in mind? She looked at him directly. I've been thinking, she said, about what it would mean to stay. Not as the auditor, in whatever the other capacity is that you haven't fully named yet. She paused. I need you to name it. He was quiet for a moment. The corridor lamp was steady. Outside, the frontier autumn was settling into something that felt more permanent. The cold that came not from storms, but from the deep architecture of the season. The cold that meant winter is coming, and this is not a metaphor. I want you to rebuild the Frontier Administration, he said. Head of the reconstruction, your authority, your methods, your timeline. And? A pause. And I want you to stay, he said. Beyond the work. Because… He stopped. Because I've been doing this for 8 years, he said. And I have never sat on a floor in a corridor in my own castle and had a conversation I didn't want to end. She looked at the bone dice in her hand. That's a different kind of offer, she said. Yes. I need to think about it. I know, he said. The court won't accept me, she said. Not easily, not quickly. Lady Crane is the polite version of what that opposition looks like. There will be less polite versions. Yes, he said. There will be. You're not going to tell me it'll be fine, she said, reading his expression. It won't be fine in the short term, he said. It will be difficult and political, and some people will make it personal. I can protect you from the direct threats. I can't protect you from the social machinery. You'd have to deal with that yourself. He paused. I think you're capable of it, but I'm not going to pretend it's not there. She was quiet for a long moment. Give me a week, she said. Take whatever you need, he said. She took 4 days. Okay. The answer she arrived at, after 4 days of thinking that she refused to call deciding because she hadn't decided yet, was interrupted on the 5th day by something that made every calculation she'd been running collapse and rebuild itself in a configuration she hadn't anticipated. It started with the message. She found it in her room, slipped under the door at some point in the night, on plain paper with no seal, 3 lines in a hand she didn't recognize. The Solon network is not contained. 2 remain outside the capital. They know your face. The wood road was a warning, not an attempt. The attempt comes next. She read it twice. Then she sat down and read it again, slower, pulling apart the structure of each sentence. Not contained. That meant Alaric's people had believed it was, which meant someone inside the castle's own intelligence structure had given them incorrect information. 2 remain. She thought about Gareth Solon, currently in custody, his network, the people he'd built over 9 years who were now exposed and facing consequences, and who would, with perfect rational motivation, want to eliminate the person whose audit had provided the evidence chain for his arrest. The wood road was a warning. She felt something cold move through her that was not quite fear. She'd framed the attack as an opportunistic response to her getting too close to the records, but a warning implied a longer game. Implied that whoever had sent those 4 men was not panicking, but planning. The attempt comes next. She folded the note, put it in her coat pocket, picked up the bone dice, put them down. Then she did something she could have not done, the thing that later she would identify as the decision that changed everything. She went looking for the intelligence herself. It was not, in retrospect, a reckless decision. It was a calculated one, which was a distinction she felt was important, even if the outcome made it look reckless afterward. The note told her she was being targeted. It also told her that the official version of events, the threat is contained, was wrong, which meant that whatever information the castle's intelligence structure had, it was either incomplete or deliberately corrupted. The only person who could tell her which was Gareth Solon. Solon was being held in the castle's east detention block, a different east wing from the records room, which she found grimly appropriate. She knew the layout from the building schematics she'd been given with the castle orientation on her first day, because she'd memorized the schematics on the first day, because that was what she did. She did not technically have authorization to be in the detention block. She had technically a set of picks and a level of structural familiarity with the castle that had been developed over 3 weeks of paying very close attention to how things worked. She also had a calculation running in the back of her mind. If I go to Alaric with this note, he will take it seriously, act on it, and I will have no control over what happens next. If I verify it first, I have information. Information is the only currency I've ever reliably had. She went at midday, when the watch rotation created a 12-minute gap on the detention block's secondary corridor. She'd observed the gap twice before, not because she'd been planning this, but because she observed everything. Solon was in the 3rd cell. He was a middle-aged man, compact and gray-haired, with the particular quality of someone who had been operating under pressure for a long time and had gotten good at not showing it. He looked at her when she appeared at his cell door with the expression of someone who had been expecting a great many things but not quite this. "You," he said. "Me," she agreed. "We have about 8 minutes before someone notices I'm here. I want information." He looked at her with a calculation running behind his eyes that she recognized because she ran the same calculation constantly. What does she want? What can I trade? What does she know that I don't? "You have nothing to offer me," he said. I have the only thing that matters to someone in your position, she said. I've read your file and I know what the formal charges are, and I know what evidence exists. I also know what evidence doesn't exist yet because I'm the one who built the evidence chain. She held his gaze through the cell door. There are gaps. I could fill them or I could not fill them. That's a meaningful distinction for you. He was quiet. The two people outside the Capitol, she said. Who are they? His expression shifted, very slightly, but she was watching for it, and what she saw was not denial but recalculation. He knew about the two people. He was deciding whether knowing that she knew was a threat or a resource. You found the note, he said. Slipped under my door. Wasn't mine, he said. Someone's playing a longer game than you know. She held the cell door bar. What does that mean? It means, he said, with the careful precision of someone choosing words for their maximum information density, that I was not the top of this. I was the mechanism. The people above me have interests that extend considerably beyond the frontier administration. He looked at her steadily. The two outside the Capitol are not here for you. She waited. They're here for him, Solon said. The audit gave you the local evidence, but the evidence that matters, the Capitol connections, the names above mine, that's in a different place. And the people who put me here know that if it surfaces, it's not just me in a detention cell. It's people with a great deal more to lose. She stared at him. The calculation running in the back of her mind was doing something fast and unpleasant. Where? She said. There's a secondary ledger, he said. Not in the castle. I had it moved 6 months ago when I realized the audit was coming. It's in the eastern forest, in the keeper's cabin near the second ridge, locked box under the floor. He paused. I'm telling you this because if those two get to it first, it disappears. And then there's no evidence above my level, and every name above mine stays clean. And in 6 months I'm released on a procedural basis and the whole thing starts again. Rowan was quiet for 3 seconds. Why tell me instead of him? Because you'll go, Solon said, with the flat certainty of someone who had been watching her for 3 weeks from a different angle than she'd realized. And because you'll bring it back. Whatever you are, you're not someone who buries evidence. He met her eyes. He'll send a team. Teams can be intercepted. You move differently. She stood at the cell door for a moment longer. Then she said, If you're lying to me, I will personally make sure the gap in the evidence chain gets filled in a way that is very bad for you. I know, he said. She left. She made 2 decisions in rapid succession, both of which she would later assess as correct on the information she had at the time, though that assessment would come at significant cost. The first decision was to go to the cabin herself. Not because she'd accepted Solon's framing, she'd accepted maybe 60% of it, which was enough to act on, but because if the ledger existed and was removed by the people looking for it, the entire case that protected her from being a loose end disappeared. The evidence chain she'd built would remain, but evidence chains had gaps, and gaps got exploited by people with enough political capital to exploit them. The second decision was to tell Alaric first. She found him in the main hall, in the middle of a briefing with 3 of his people, and she walked in and said, I need to speak with you, now. He read her face in the time it took her to cross the room. She watched him do it, watched the assessment happen behind his eyes. And he said, without hesitation, to the 3 people, Give us the room. They went. He looked at her. She told him everything. The note, Solon, the ledger, the cabin. She told it in sequence and without editorializing, the way she'd report a set of findings, because that was the most efficient way to convey information under time pressure and because she could feel, in the back of her mind, the clock running. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You went to Solon yourself, he said. Yes. Without telling me first. I needed to verify the note before I brought it to you, she said. If the note was a misdirection, someone trying to get me to report a false threat and destabilize the investigation, I needed to know that before I acted on it. And if it was a trap, then I'd have found that out too, she said. At personal cost, yes, but the information would have been real. He looked at her with an expression she didn't have a clean name for. Not anger, or not only anger, something more layered. The cabin is 4 miles into the eastern forest, he said. The two people Solon mentioned, if they have the same information about the ledger's location, they'll already be moving. Yes, she said, which is why we need to leave now. We, he said. You know that forest better than anyone, she said, in either form, and I know what I'm looking for in the ledger. She met his eyes. I'm not asking your permission. I'm saying we're faster together. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned to the door and said, in a completely different register, the voice she hadn't quite heard from him before, the voice that did not explain or persuade but simply issued, Linden, Cora, Eastern Trail, now. Two wolves appeared from somewhere she hadn't seen them. Alaric looked back at her. Stay close to me, he said. If I shift, keep pace. Can you run 4 miles? I can run 4 miles with cracked ribs if the alternative is worse, she said. Something moved in his expression. Let's go, he said. They moved through the eastern forest at a pace that Rowan achieved by the simple mechanism of refusing to acknowledge what it cost her. Alaric stayed in human form for the first 2 miles, and she was aware of him calibrating his speed to hers without making a performance of it, which she appreciated in the same way she appreciated all competence, cleanly, without sentiment. The eastern forest was old growth, the kind of woods that had been left alone long enough to develop its own ecology, its own ambient darkness, even in the afternoon light. The trees were large enough that their canopy closed overhead and turned the light green and diffuse. The ground underfoot was soft with decades of leaf fall. Under other circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. Under these circumstances, she found it a complex problem of visibility, acoustics, and threat assessment. Linden and Cora ran in their wolf forms, flanking at a distance she couldn't always see but could track by the pattern of silences they made in the undergrowth. She had spent enough time near Alaric to have developed a working understanding of how pack coordination operated, the communication that happened below the level of language, the way they moved as a unit without apparent signaling. She found it professionally impressive. They were 20 minutes out from the cabin's estimated location when Alaric stopped. She stopped beside him. He had his head up in the way she'd come to understand meant he was reading the air, the specific absolute attention of a predator parsing information that she simply didn't have access to. 2 people, he said, low. Ahead, moving toward the cabin. Ahead of us or ahead of the cabin? Between us and it. A pause. 3 minutes, maybe 4. She looked at the trees ahead, calculated. If they reach the cabin first and have the same location information Solon gave me, they'll take the ledger and leave, he said, or destroy it. Can your people cut around? Yes, but quietly means slowly. She thought for 1 second. 2. The bone dice were in her pocket. They were always in her pocket. And she touched them briefly, a reflex, a grounding. I'll go straight, she said. I'm slower than them, but I'm not a threat they'll see coming. They're looking for a pack response, not a person on foot. She met his eyes. If I get there first and get the ledger. If they catch you alone in that cabin, he said, with a precision that carried no room for debate, you die. I know, she said. So your people need to be 30 seconds behind me. He looked at her for a moment that had the quality of a held breath. 30 seconds, he said. Not 40. 30, she said, and ran. She ran the way she'd learned to run in 15 years on the frontier. Not fast enough to be reckless, but fast enough to matter, using the trees the way she'd learned to use any environment, as resource rather than obstacle. Her ribs made their opinion known in clear, specific language. She filed it under information I already have and kept moving. The keeper's cabin was exactly where Solon had described. A low structure of old timber at the base of the second ridge, half hidden by decades of encroaching undergrowth. The door was unlocked, which was either because the keeper was careless or because someone had been here recently. She noted both possibilities and went in. The interior was dim. 1 room, a cold hearth, a table, shelves with the remnants of supplies gone stale. The floor was packed earth with wooden boards over the section nearest the east wall. She crossed to it in 4 steps, found the board that moved, and pulled it up. The box was there. She got it open in 12 seconds. The lock was simple. the kind that expected obscurity rather than security to protect it, and pulled out the ledger inside. She had time for approximately 3 seconds of holding it before the cabin door opened. One of them came in from the front. She heard the second one outside, circling to the cabin's single window. Coordinated approach. They'd seen her enter and been faster than she'd accounted for. The one who came through the door was tall, with the compact stillness of someone who'd done this before. He didn't have a weapon in his hand, which meant he was confident he didn't need one. "Put it down," he said. She looked at him. Then she looked at the ledger in her hands. Then she looked, with a precision that she could feel him reading, at the window, at his partner outside, and then at the door behind him. "How many people have looked for this?" she said. He didn't answer. "The previous 2 auditors," she said. "Did they find it?" "Put it down," he said again. "This ends the same way regardless." "Different end if you explain who sent you," she said. "Different in a way that might matter to you personally." "Last time," he said. She held the ledger and ran the arithmetic one more time. The arithmetic. 30 seconds. She'd told him 30 seconds, and she was 34 seconds in, and the window was occupied, and the door was occupied, and she had a knife she couldn't reach before he crossed the room. The wall of the cabin came apart. Not through the door, not through the window, through the wall itself, in the particular way that a structure yielded to something large and moving at speed, the timber cracking and giving inward in a cascade of splinters and cold air. And through the gap came a wolf the size of a large nightmare, dark-furred and moving with a velocity that made the small cabin feel suddenly very much smaller. The man at the door had a half-second of reaction time. He used it to run, which was the correct instinct. She heard the second person outside make a sound that was the human equivalent of the same decision. She was left standing in a cabin with a large hole in the east wall, the ledger still in her hands, splinters in her hair, and a wolf standing in the wreckage of the wall looking at her with an attention that was, she noted, even in wolf form, identifiably and specifically directed at her. 32 seconds, she said. Her voice was completely steady. She was genuinely not sure how that was possible given what her heart was doing, but she was grateful for it. The wolf made a sound low in its chest, not quite any category of sound she had a name for, but with a quality to it that she understood, somehow, as something between "I was watching the whole time" and "don't do that again." "The ledger's intact," she said. She held it up. "I have it." Outside, she heard the sounds of the pack and the brief, decisive quality of things being concluded. Then quiet. She stood in the cold air coming through the hole in the wall and looked at the wolf who was looking at her and felt, for the first time since she'd received the note that morning, something that was not quite calm, but was the next thing over from it. The particular settling that came when the immediate crisis had resolved and the rest of the calculation hadn't caught up yet. The ledger was in her hands. The names above Solon's would be in it. The case would hold. The wolf watched her breathe. She looked down at the ledger and then back up at him. "I'm going to need you to shift back," she said, "so you can carry the other half of this because I'm fairly sure my ribs have an opinion about the last 3 minutes that they haven't finished sharing with me yet." The wolf shifted. Alaric was standing in the hole in the wall in the cold afternoon light, breathing harder than usual, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something stripped of its usual management, something immediate and unguarded and slightly frightening in its directness. "You told me 30 seconds, he said. "You were there in 32, she said. "Close enough." "Rowan?" He crossed the cabin in 3 steps. His hands, warm, certain, came up to her face, and she realized that she had, at some point in the last 30 seconds, started shaking. Not fear. The aftermath of fear, which was different. The body presenting its invoice for services rendered under extreme duress. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you're fine," he said. "I can see you're fine." "Then, let me," he said. Not an explanation, not a request, quite. Just, let me. She stood in the wreckage of a keeper's cabin in the eastern forest with the ledger pressed against her chest, and his hands warm on her face, and the autumn cold coming through the wall, and the bone dice in her pocket, and let him. Outside, the forest had gone quiet. The crisis was over. Something else was just beginning, and she could feel it the way she felt everything. Not in her chest, where emotion happened, but in her whole structure, in the deep architecture of herself that had been built over 15 years of going it alone, which was cracking, with the particular inevitability of wood under enough consistent pressure, in a place she had not expected. She should have been alarmed. She noted, with a kind of distant curiosity, that she wasn't. She was still noting it when she felt the warmth spread from where his hands held her face through her entire body, and then the clarity shifted, became something else, something she didn't have a word for because she had never felt it before. And the forest went white at the edges, and the ledger slipped from fingers that were no longer responding to her correctly, and the last thing she heard before the dark came up again was his voice saying her name with an urgency that had nothing calculated in it at all. Then the dark. Then nothing. And then something, some new thing entirely, began. She came back to herself in pieces. The first piece was warmth, not the ambient warmth of a room, but something more immediate, more structural, as if the heat were coming from inside her rather than from any external source. The second piece was sound, a fire burning low, the particular quiet of a space that was large but contained, and somewhere at the edge of audibility, breathing that was not her own. The third piece was her body, which filed its report with the thoroughness of something that had been keeping records while she was absent. Ribs, yes, worse than before, but underneath that, underneath and through and woven into every other sensation, something she had no existing category for. She felt him before she opened her eyes, not in the way she felt the warmth of the fire or the weight of the blankets, in the way she felt her own heartbeat, interior, structural, unavoidable. She knew he was in the room the way she knew she was breathing, without looking, without thinking, with a certainty that preceded all other information. She opened her eyes. The room was the castle's infirmary, the same one as before, the same lamp bracket on the wall, but the light through the window was different, which meant time had passed. How much time she couldn't calculate yet. Petra was not present. The chair beside the cot was occupied by Alaric, who was awake and watching her with an expression that had been stripped of every layer of management she'd seen on him before. "How long?" she said. Her voice came out wrong, rough, lower than usual. "A day and a half," he said. "The ledger is secure," he said. "Everything is secure. Stop trying to work." She looked at the ceiling, ran a basic inventory of her own physical state, and arrived at several conclusions, most of which were familiar, and one of which was not. The unfamiliar one was the thing she'd noticed before she opened her eyes, the sense of him as a presence in the room, specific and unmistakable and deeply unsettling in its intimacy. "What happened to me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. She turned her head and looked at him directly, because that was always her method. Look directly, read the response, deal with what you find. His expression told her before he spoke that whatever he was about to say was going to require adjustment on her part. "When I found you in the forest," he said. "The first time. After the attack on the wood road." He paused. "You were dying." She'd known this on some level. She'd been conscious enough during the carryback to understand that her situation had been assessed as serious, but dying had a precision to it that she hadn't let herself fully examine. "The damage was internal," he said. "The blow to your head. There was bleeding." Petra confirmed it afterward. "Without intervention, you wouldn't have lasted the night." "So you brought me here," she said. "And Petra couldn't treat it," he said. "Not fast enough. There are things that medicine can't move quickly enough to address when the clock is that short." He held her gaze. "I made a choice." She looked at him. "A bite," he said, "from an alpha. The transformation. It accelerates healing in ways that human medicine can't replicate. The body rebuilds itself." He paused. "It also does other things." The warmth that had been the first thing she felt, the certainty of his presence, the interior knowledge of him that she'd woken to before she'd even opened her eyes. The bone dice were on the table beside the cot. She focused on them for a moment, the carved surfaces, the worn edges, using the familiar object as an anchor, while her mind assembled what she was being told into a shape she could examine. "You bit me," she said, "without asking me." You were unconscious. Without asking me, she repeated. He didn't deflect from it. Yes. To save my life. Yes. And the other things it does, she said, define those. He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, organizing the answer, she thought, with the care of someone who understood that what he was about to say was going to land in difficult territory and was trying to find the most honest path through it. The bond, he said, between an alpha and someone they've turned, it's not like pack bonds. It's more specific, more direct. He met her eyes. You can feel me. My location, in a general sense, my emotional state sometimes. And I can feel you. She was quiet. That's what woke you, he said. The warmth. That's the bond. It's not something that goes away. She lay still and felt it. Now that she was looking for it, it was unmistakable. A thread of knowing that ran from some deep point in her chest in a direction that corresponded to exactly where he was sitting. She could feel, if she paid attention, the particular quality of his concern, not as a vague impression, but as something specific and textured, like reading a room she was standing inside. Permanent, she said. Yes. And you decided this, she said, unilaterally, for the second time. The word second landed the way she meant it to, carrying the weight of its predecessor. The first time he'd made a decision about her situation without consulting her, the pattern she'd already noted and already called out, and which had now repeated itself at a scale she hadn't anticipated. Rowan, I'm not... She stopped, took a breath, which her ribs registered clearly. I'm not going to have this conversation while I'm lying down. She sat up. This was a decision that cost her a sharp, vivid amount of discomfort, which she absorbed without external expression because she was not going to conduct this conversation from a position of physical disadvantage. When the room finished rearranging itself, she swung her legs over the side of the cot and sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and her eyes on his face. All right, she said. He hadn't moved. He was watching her with the same stripped-down expression. No management, no composure performance. Just him, looking at her. You should have told me, she said. Before the forest. When you knew I was a target. Before the wood road attack. Before any of this became... She gestured, briefly, at the general situation. This. Yes, he said. You made 2 decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent, she said. The surveillance was one. This is another. And this one is permanent. Yes, he said again. Stop agreeing with me, she said with a sudden edge. It's harder to be angry at someone who won't argue. Something moved in his expression, not quite the thing that made him look like a different person, something more careful than that. Do you want me to argue? I want you to explain yourself, she said. Not agree. Explain, because agreeing tells me you know you were wrong, and knowing you were wrong doesn't tell me anything about whether you do it differently. He held her gaze for a long moment. In the forest, he said, when I found you the second time. In the cabin. His voice was level, but with something underneath it that she could now feel as well as hear. The particular quality of a person containing something that didn't want to be contained. The bond was beginning then. Even before the shift. Even before I could feel you. For a day and a half I could feel you. And what I felt was... He stopped. Tell me, she said. Wrong, he said. Everything that was you was wrong. The thread of it. I've felt pack bonds. I know what they feel like when they're severed. And what I could feel from you was everything in the direction of that. He paused. I will not sit here and tell you I weighed it carefully and reached a considered conclusion. I made the decision in about 4 seconds because the alternative was watching you die by degrees, and I was not... Another pause. I was not capable of that. The room was quiet. Rowan looked at the bone dice on the table. She picked them up, the warmth of them, the familiar weight, and turned them over in her fingers. The bond, she said, what I feel from you right now. What do you feel? He said, not quite a question. Dread, she said. The particular kind that comes from having done something that can't be undone and not knowing if it was right. She met his eyes. Is that accurate? His expression did the thing. The shift. The unguarded version. Yes, he said quietly. That's accurate. She turned the dice over once more. The transformation, she said. What does it mean? Practically. Accelerated healing. You've already experienced that. Enhanced senses, though they'll take time to develop. Longer lifespan. He paused. Pack. You're part of mine. Not subordinate. I need you to understand that. The bond doesn't create hierarchy. It creates connection, she said. Yes. That I didn't choose. Yes. She sat with that. 15 years of choosing exactly who she let close, which was almost no one. 15 years of making herself the variable, the unpredictable element, the one who moved on before anything got complicated. 15 years of the bone dice and the road and the next town and the absolute clarity of owing nothing to anyone. She was furious. She was also, underneath the fury, running a different calculation, the one she ran when she found something she hadn't accounted for in a system she thought she understood. The calculation that asked not how did this happen, but what is this exactly, and what does it mean for everything else? What she could feel through the bond was not only dread, there was something else in it, something she kept bumping up against and then retreating from because she didn't yet have a framework to put it in. Something that felt like she reached for the right word with the precision she brought to every accurate description. Wanting her to be all right was the closest she could get. But that wasn't quite it. It was bigger than that. It was the wanting her to be all right of someone for whom her not being all right was personally, viscerally, structurally unacceptable. She had never, in 37 years of being in the world, been something that anyone found structurally unacceptable to lose. She set the dice down. I'm going to be angry about this for a while, she said. I know, he said, and you're going to have to live with that. Yes. And the fact that I'm angry doesn't mean I don't understand why you did it, she said. I understand why you did it. Understanding and consenting are different things, and I need you to understand that difference clearly. I understand it, he said. I understood it in the forest. I made the choice anyway. He held her gaze. I would make it again. I want you to know that. Not because I don't hear you, I hear you, but because I won't pretend, even now, that I would have let you die to preserve the principle. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said finally. That's the part I'm most angry about. He didn't ask her to explain. He understood. She could feel him understand, which was the strangest sensation she'd ever experienced, the particular way her meaning landed in him, complete and unmangled. Rest, he said. We'll talk more when... There's something else, she said. He stilled. The capital, she said. The names in the ledger. How far up does it go? His expression shifted, back toward the managed version, the working version, and she saw the transition and recognized it as the thing that happened when he moved from private to operational. She filed this distinction carefully, because it was going to matter. The ledger names 3 people in the capital administration, he said. One is the head of frontier resource allocation. One is a senior treasury officer. One, a pause, is my father's former chancellor. She was quiet. My father has been dead for 4 years, he said. But the chancellor, Deverin, retained his position in the transition. He's been operating for 9 years. The frontier operation is the one we can prove, but it's not the only one. It's probably not even the largest. He'll know the ledger has been recovered, she said. Yes. Which means he'll move to neutralize it before formal proceedings can be initiated. She turned the dice over. How long until you can move against him formally? With the evidence from the ledger, 2 weeks, maybe 3. The capital proceedings require... He won't wait 3 weeks, she said. No, Alaric said. He won't. She looked at the window. The light was the particular flat gray of a day that hadn't decided between cloud and sun, the kind of light that made everything look like a problem that hadn't been solved yet. I need to read the ledger, she said. Rowan, I need to read it, she said again. I built the evidence chain in the castle records. I know the pattern of the falsifications better than anyone. If the ledger has corresponding records, I can establish the link faster than whoever you'd otherwise assign to it." She looked at him. "How fast do you need the formal case to be ready?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "As fast as possible." "Then I need the ledger," she said. "And I need to not be in this infirmary." He stood. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the latch and turned back. Not the working version now, the other one, the stripped-down one, and said quietly, "Are we going to be all right?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me when I have more information." He almost smiled. She felt it, and then felt herself feel it, which was still deeply strange. He nodded and opened the door, and she heard him in the corridor speaking in a low voice to someone, and she sat on the edge of the cot with the bone dice in her hands and let herself, just for a moment, feel the full weight of what her life had become in the past 4 weeks. Then she put it aside, because there was work to do. There was always work to do. Eek. She was back in the East Records room by the following morning. Hessa found her there at 7 o'clock and stood in the doorway with the particular expression of someone who had given up being surprised and was now simply annotating the world as it presented itself. "Petra said 2 more days," Hessa said. "Petra was speaking to a different situation," Rowan said, without looking up from the ledger. "My situation has updated." "Your—" Hessa stopped. Started again. "The king mentioned something had changed. In terms of your—" "Yes," Rowan said. "That's a different conversation for a different time. Right now I need the capital correspondence files, the ones from 4 years ago, the year of the transition." "Are they in the sealed archive?" Hessa crossed the room and stood beside her, looking at the ledger open on the table. She was quiet for a moment, reading the columns of figures. "The sealed archive requires the king's authorization," she said. "He's authorized it," Rowan said. "I asked him 20 minutes ago." Another pause. "You asked him at 6:30 in the morning." "He was awake," Rowan said. "He's usually awake before I am, which I find—" She stopped herself. "The correspondence files." Hessa looked at her with the careful attention of someone who was updating a significant internal model. "I'll have them brought up," she said. "It'll take an hour." "Fine." "And Hessa," Rowan looked up for the first time. "The 3 people in the capital that the ledger names, how many people in this castle know those names?" "Including you?" "Including me." "You and the king," Hessa said, "and myself, and Lyndon, who was there when the ledger was examined." "Keep it that way," Rowan said. "Until we're ready to move, the smaller that circle is, the better." "You think there's someone in the castle?" "I think Devon has been operational for 9 years," Rowan said. "And I think the 2 people in the eastern forest knew exactly where to go, which means the information about the ledger's location passed through someone who shouldn't have had it." She held Hessa's gaze. "I don't know yet who, but until I do, we contain the information." Hessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The previous 2 auditors." "Yes," Rowan said. "Deverin's people." "Almost certainly." "And the Wood Road attack." "The local operation," Rowan said. "Solon. But Solon was taking orders from somewhere, and that somewhere knew when I was getting close." Hessa sat down, which she had never done in the East Records room before in Rowan's presence. She sat down and looked at the ledger, and was quiet for a long time. "You've been here 4 weeks," she said. 26 days, Rowan said, "and you found more than—" Hessa stopped. "The previous investigation ran for 6 months." "The previous investigation," Rowan said, as gently as she could manage while being entirely direct, "was probably compromised from the beginning." The word landed in the room like something solid. Hessa absorbed it with the stillness of someone who had been in her position long enough to know what it cost, personally and professionally, to find out that the system you'd been working inside had been hollowed out without your knowledge. "What do you need?" Hessa said. "Everything I just asked for," Rowan said, "and your absolute trust that what I'm doing with it is the correct thing." Hessa looked at her for a long, measuring moment. The same quality of assessment she'd applied on the first morning, when Rowan had walked into her office and been evaluated for the position of temporary castle auditor. "You have it," Hessa said. She spent 6 days building the second case. This one was different from the first, not the chaos of an unexamined archive, but the deliberate reconstruction of a system that had been designed to be undetectable. Deverin was not like Solon. Solon had been careful in the way that people were careful when they were afraid of being caught. Deverin was careful in the way that people were careful when they'd spent 9 years refining their methods and had never been seriously threatened. The capital correspondence files were the key. She read them the way she'd read the castle records, not looking for the evidence that should be there, but looking for the shape of what was absent. The negative space, the invoices that didn't have corresponding correspondence, the authorizations that had been issued without the paper trail that should have preceded them. The pattern of non-communication between people who, given their roles, should have been communicating constantly. She built it in sections. Each section was a proof. Each proof pointed to the same source. On the third day, she found the connection that she'd suspected from the beginning but hadn't been able to confirm. The mechanism by which Deverin's capital operation and Solon's frontier operation had been linked. It was elegant, in the way that sustained deception was always elegant. A set of parallel accounts, each legitimate in isolation, each appearing to report to a different authority, each actually feeding into a single consolidation point that had been buried in the transition paperwork from 4 years ago. The year Alaric's father had died. The year the new reign had begun. 9 years, she thought. Solon started the frontier operation the same year Deverin embedded the mechanism in the transition records. Not opportunism, architecture. The whole thing had been designed before Alaric took the throne. Designed, she suspected, as a hedge against exactly the kind of governance she was seeing from him. The kind that went to frontier taverns in plain cloaks and sordid invoices for temporary castle auditors. The kind that actually paid attention to what was happening in the territory he governed. She brought this to Alaric on the evening of the third day, in the East Records room, with the documentation laid out across the table in the sequence she'd established. He read it without speaking, moving through the pages with the same focused attention he'd brought to invoice sorting 3 weeks ago, which felt now like a completely different version of the world. She stood on the other side of the table and waited and felt, through the bond, the specific quality of his concentration. The thing she was learning to identify as him processing something complex at high speed, a particular quality of internal stillness that was different from his baseline stillness. When he reached the last page, he was quiet for a moment. "The transition records," he said. "Yes. He embedded it before I took the throne." "Before you could have known what to look for," she said. "And then he made sure through the audit process that no one who was looking would find it. 2 auditors. Probably 3, she said. I think the first one left willingly. She might not have found it at all. The second one got too close and was warned off. The third," she paused. "I don't know. I'd want to locate him before the formal proceedings begin." Alaric looked at the documentation. "We have enough." "Almost," she said. "There's one more connection I want to establish before you move. There's a discrepancy in the 4th transition account that I haven't been able to trace yet. I think it points to a 4th person, someone at the capital who's been managing the consolidation point since it was set up. If we move before I find them, they survive the proceedings." He looked at her. "How long?" 3 days, she said. "Maybe 2. 3, he said. "After that, we move regardless." "Agreed." He looked at the documentation again, then at her. "You've been doing this for 6 days, he said. "I'm aware of how many days it's been." "Your ribs are improved," she said. "The healing. You were right about that. It's faster than anything I've experienced before." She said this neutrally, as a factual observation, because that was the register she was still operating in regarding the broader topic of the bond and the transformation and all its attendant complications. She had not yet moved to a different register. She was working up to it. "Rowan." He said her name in the way she was coming to understand meant he was about to say something he'd prepared. Not scripted, but considered. "The court." "Lady Crane," she said. "Among others," he said. "There have been conversations since it became known that you were still here. And in what capacity?" "Word travels fast." I have a court of 200 people who have nothing else to do all day but speculate, he said, with a dryness she'd come to value. Word travels at approximately the speed of thought. He paused. There will be a formal session in 4 days. The court sits together. It's procedural, but it's also people will see you. In the context of whatever you and I are, she said. Yes. She looked at the documentation on the table, then at him. What are you asking me? I'm asking you, he said carefully. What you want, not what you're willing to do. What you want. She picked up the bone dice, turned them over. I want to finish this case, she said. I want Deverin in front of a formal proceeding with evidence he can't refute. And I want the 14 frontier settlements to have the money and protection they've been owed for 3 years. She paused. After that, I want to rebuild the financial administration of the frontier because it needs doing, and I'm the person who knows how to do it. Another pause. After that, I don't know. I'm still working on the after that. But you're not leaving, he said. I'm not leaving, she said. Not yet. Not while there's work that isn't finished. And after the work is finished. She looked at him directly. Through the bond, she could feel the particular quality of the question. The thing underneath it. The thing he wasn't saying because he was trying, as he always tried, to not make her feel cornered. Still working on it, she said. But she held his gaze when she said it, and she felt him receive that. The eye contact as information, as more than words would have been. And the quality of what came back through the bond was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. The court session, he said. Will you come? I'll come, she said, on one condition. Name it. I come as myself, she said. Not in court clothes I don't own, not with my mouth shut, not pretending to be something I'm not to make Lady Crane's life easier. If the court is going to form an opinion of me, they're going to form it based on who I actually am. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that made him look like a different person. Agreed, he said. They're going to hate it, she said. Probably, he said. For a while. And you're comfortable with that. I've been running a kingdom for 8 years, he said. I am intimately familiar with doing the right thing in the face of broad institutional displeasure. A pause. You could say you trained me. She almost smiled. I've known you for 4 weeks. 27 days, he said. The court session was 4 days later. She wore her own clothes, the best of them, which were good enough if you weren't measuring against courtly standards, and she had decided she wasn't. She walked into the great hall with the same gait she used for everything. Unhurried, direct, with the bone dice in her coat pocket and her back straight and her eyes moving the way they always did, reading the room. The room was extraordinary. 200 people arranged in the precise social geometry of a court that had been operating on the same principles for generations. Rank, alliance, appearance, the invisible architecture of who stood where and with whom and how they angled their bodies to signal their allegiances. She read it in about 30 seconds with the same structural attention she'd applied to the castle records, and found it, like most complex systems, to have a logic that became navigable once you understood the underlying architecture. Lady Crane was there. She met Rowan's gaze from across the room with an expression that acknowledged without warmth the fact that Rowan had turned out to be more durable than expected. Rowan met it with the polite neutrality of someone who had decided to find the court interesting rather than threatening, because interesting was a more useful frame. The session was procedural, appointments confirmed, administrative matters addressed, the formal language of governance that Rowan found simultaneously tedious and clarifying, because it told you a great deal about how power actually organized itself once you understood what the formal language was translating. She stood where she'd been positioned, watched, listened, and said nothing. Until the frontier. It came up mid-session, a report on the status of the border settlements, presented by a court official who was reading numbers from a document in the flat tone of someone delivering information they hadn't actually examined. The numbers were wrong, not dramatically, not obviously to someone without Rowan's specific knowledge, but wrong in the particular way that numbers were wrong when they hadn't been cross-referenced against the corrected records. She said, "Those figures are from the pre-audit records." The official stopped mid-sentence. 200 people looked at her. She looked at the official. The settlement reports from the pre-audit records are 18 months old and reflect the resource diversions, not the actual settlement conditions. The corrected figures are, she named them. From memory, because she had read every line of those records. The silence was the particular silence of a room that had just reorganized its attention. The official looked at his document, then at her. And you are... She's the person who conducted the audit, Alaric said from where he stood. His voice was level, carrying no particular emphasis, which was itself a kind of emphasis. The corrected figures are the accurate ones. Proceed with those. Another silence. Shorter this time. The session proceeded. But something had shifted yet. She could feel it the way she felt changes in a room during a dice game, the moment when the energy reorganized and the dynamics between the players were different from what they'd been before. Not acceptance, that was much further away, and she wasn't expecting it yet. Something more preliminary than that. The first acknowledgement that she knew things other people in this room didn't know, and that the things she knew were relevant. Lady Crane was watching her from across the room with an expression that had, for the first time, a different quality to it. Not warmth, nothing close to warmth, but a recalculation, the specific look of someone updating their model. Rowan held her gaze for a moment, then she looked away because she had other things to pay attention to, and the room was full of them. After the session, in the corridor outside the hall, Hessa appeared beside her with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been in motion for some time. The fourth account, Hessa said, low, the discrepancy you were tracking. Rowan looked at her. I found it, Hessa said. The name, it's... She paused, glancing around the corridor. It's Crane. Rowan was still for a moment. Not Vesa Crane, Hessa said quickly. Her brother. He's a treasury officer in the capital. He's been the consolidation point manager for 9 years. Rowan thought about the conversation in the corridor 3 weeks ago. The assessment. You don't have family connections, political alliances, or social capital of any kind. The implicit subtext, I do, and they protect me. She thought about the shape of the architecture. Deverin at the top, Solan in the frontier, Crane's brother at the consolidation point. 3 people, 9 years, 14 settlements. Does she know? Rowan said. Hessa was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said. I can't find any evidence that she does, but I can't find evidence that she doesn't. Rowan looked back at the hall doors, closed now, the sounds of the court dispersing into the castle's corridors. All right, she said. Get me the documentation on the brother. Everything. And don't tell anyone else yet. Including the king? I'll tell him tonight, she said, after I've looked at everything myself. She stood in the corridor while the castle moved around her. The daily machinery of a court that she was beginning to understand, also a living thing, with all the complexity and dysfunction of any living thing, with its alliances and its compromises and its blind spots and its capacity, occasionally, for something better than it had been. She turned the bone dice over in her fingers. In her chest, the thread of the bond was steady and warm, pointing in the direction of the great hall where Alaric was concluding the post-session formalities. Through it, she could feel the quality of his awareness of her. Not intrusive, not demanding, just present. The way a fire was present in a room, warming without requiring acknowledgement. She had been angry. She was still, technically, angry. She was committed to the anger because the principle of it was correct, and principles didn't expire on a convenient schedule. But underneath the anger, something else had been building for 27 days, with the patience of something that knew it didn't need to hurry. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but she was no longer pretending it wasn't there. She pocketed the dice and turned toward the records room, where the documentation on Edmund Crane, Treasury Officer, was waiting for her to read it. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 15 years, she found that she didn't mind. The documentation on Edmund Crane took her 4 hours to read and 2 more to fully understand. Not because it was complicated, by the standards of what she'd been working through for the past month, it was almost straightforward. But because it was thorough in a way that forced her to sit with the full scope of what 9 years of deliberate theft looked like when you assembled it into a single coherent picture. 14 frontier settlements, 3 years at full operational capacity, another 6 years of development before that. The numbers she arrived at, by the end of the second hour, were the kind of numbers that stopped being abstract and became something else. Became roads not repaired, harvests not protected, families who had paid their taxes faithfully and received nothing in return and never understood why. She wrote the final number at the bottom of her tally sheet and sat looking at it for a long time. Then she went to find Alaric. He was in the map room, one of the places she'd learned he went when he needed to think. A long room on the castle's third floor lined with territorial maps that had been updated by generations of cartographers, each one annotating the changes of their particular era. She found him standing at the central table with his hands flat on a map of the frontier, looking at it with the specific quality of attention she recognized as him, doing arithmetic of a different kind than hers. Not financial, but human. The weight of the territory. The people in it. She put the tally sheet on the table beside the map without speaking. He looked at it. He read it in silence. He was quiet for a long moment. "Edmund Crane," he said. "Treasury officer, 9th year," she said. "His sister doesn't know. I'm about as certain as I can be without a direct conversation with her, and I think a direct conversation with her is warranted before the proceedings. If she's clean, she deserves to know what's coming. If she's not—" She paused. "She doesn't read as complicit to me, but I've been wrong about people before." "Lady Crane," he said, with the quality of someone processing a reconfiguration. "She came to warn you away." "Because she saw you paying attention to me and she thought I was an opportunist," Rowan said. "That's not the reasoning of someone covering a conspiracy. That's the reasoning of someone who's been in the court long enough to be cynical about opportunists." She paused. "Which, from her perspective, I was a reasonable candidate for. And now?" "Now I'm something she doesn't have a category for," Rowan said. "Which is a different problem." Alaric looked at the tally sheet again. "When can we move?" "Tomorrow," she said. "If you send the capital riders tonight, the warrants can be prepared by morning." She met his eyes. "I want to be in the room when Deverin is presented with the evidence. I want to watch him try to refute it." He looked at her. "That's a risk." "I know what's in that evidence chain better than anyone alive," she said. "If he finds a gap, I want to be there to close it." She held his gaze. "I built this case. I finish it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll arrange it." She picked up the tally sheet, then she put it back down. "There's something else," she said. "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, organizing not the information but the way she was going to say it, which was a distinction she'd been making more often recently and which she was not entirely sure how to feel about. She had spent 15 years being precise because precision was efficient. She was finding that there were situations where precision and honesty required different things, and the gap between them was something she was still learning to navigate. "The bond," she said. She stopped, started differently. "I've been paying attention to it, learning the texture of it, the way I'd learn any new system." She looked at the map on the table, the frontier, the settlements, the territory that was both abstract and, now, deeply personal. "What I can feel from you most of the time, it's not intrusive, it's—" She reached for the word. "Steady." He was very still. "I'm still angry about how it happened," she said. "I want to be clear about that. The anger is real, and it's not going away on a schedule." "I know," he said. "But the thing itself," she said, "what it is, between us—" She turned the bone dice over in her fingers. "I'm not angry about that." The map room was quiet. Outside the narrow windows, the frontier evening was settling in, the first hard cold of what felt like a winter that had made up its mind, the sky going dark early in the way of late autumn at this latitude, the stars appearing before the light had entirely gone. She had seen this sky from the road, from the backs of horses, from the doorways of taverns in 24 settlements. She had never seen it from a castle window before this month. She was not sure, she realized, when it had started to look like home. "Rowan," he said. She looked at him. "After tomorrow," he said. "When it's done." He held her gaze with the same stripped-down quality she'd first seen in the infirmary. No management, no composure performance, just him. I want you to stay, not for the work, not because the administrative reconstruction is ongoing or because the frontier needs someone who can find discrepancies in transition paperwork. He paused. Because this castle is different with you in it. Because I am different in ways I'm still identifying when you're in the room. Another pause. Because I went to frontier taverns for 8 years looking for the truth, and when I found it, I wasn't expecting it to be a person. She looked at the bone dice in her hand, the ones that had been her mother's, the ones she'd been turning in her fingers for 15 years as a grounding mechanism, a way of staying present in rooms that wanted to unsettle her. She turned them over one more time, and then she put them down on the map table. Not dropped, not discarded, but set down deliberately, the way you set something down when you don't need to hold it anymore. Ask me again, she said. After tomorrow. Why after tomorrow? Because I don't make decisions when there's still a case to close, she said. It contaminates the reasoning. He almost smiled. She felt it. Understood, he said. But, she said before she could reconsider, for the record, before tomorrow, I am not leaving. She picked up the bone dice, pocketed them, and walked to the door before the quality of what she'd just said could reorganize the air in the room into something she wasn't ready to stand inside yet. Behind her, she heard him breathe. She slept 4 hours. It was enough. The Capital Riders left at midnight. By the time the castle woke to its regular morning, the warrants were already on their way, and 3 members of Alaric's personal guard were quietly repositioned in the castle's communication channels in ways that would become clear, Rowan had calculated, within 48 hours. She spent the morning in the records room doing the final organization of the evidence chains, not because they needed work, but because she needed the familiar discipline of it, the ordered movement through documented fact, as preparation for the afternoon. Hessa came at 11 with coffee and information. Lady Crane is requesting an audience with you, she said. Rowan looked up. When? This morning, if possible. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Send her here. Hessa raised an eyebrow at the venue. Here. She wants to talk to me, Rowan said. This is where I work. Vessa Crane arrived 20 minutes later and stood in the doorway of the East Records room with an expression that Rowan had not seen on her before. Not the social armor of the corridor encounter, not the political calculation of the court session. Something more exposed than either of those. Come in, Rowan said. The chair's free. Lady Crane came in. She looked at the organized stacks of documentation, at the tally sheets, at the evidence chains laid out in the particular order Rowan had developed over the past weeks. She sat down. My brother, she said. Yes, Rowan said. How long have you known? 4 days. Lady Crane was quiet for a moment. I didn't... She stopped. Started again with the precision of someone who had decided to abandon a particular kind of self-protection. I genuinely didn't know. I want you to know that, not because it changes anything practically, but because... She stopped again. Because you need to say it, Rowan said. Yes. A pause. He's 10 years younger than me. I got him the treasury position when he finished his studies. Her hands, Rowan noted, were very still in her lap. The stillness of someone applying significant effort to appearing composed. I thought I was helping him. Rowan looked at her directly. I believe you, she said, for whatever that's worth, coming from me. Lady Crane looked at her, a different kind of look than before. The assessment was still there, but it was oriented differently now toward something other than threat evaluation. What happens to him? She said. Formal proceedings, Rowan said. The evidence is comprehensive. The outcome is not uncertain. She paused. What happens to you depends on what the investigation finds, and I believe it will find that you had no knowledge. She held Lady Crane's gaze. But I can't make promises about proceedings I'm not running. No, Lady Crane said. I suppose not. She was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, with the quality of someone doing something that cost them. You were right in the court session about the frontier figures. I know, Rowan said. I was wrong about you, Lady Crane said. I assessed you as, a category of person that you're not. You assessed me as an opportunist, Rowan said, From the outside, I was a reasonable candidate. From the outside, Lady Crane agreed. Yes. She stood. She stood with the same impeccable posture as always, but it looked different now, so it's not performance, just structure. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. I know you will, Rowan said. That was also in the assessment. Something moved across Lady Crane's expression. Not quite the beginning of respect, but the beginning of the thing that could become respect, if given time. She inclined her head with the formality of the court and left. Rowan sat in the quiet of the records room for a moment and then went back to work. The capital riders returned on the third day with warrants and 4 Crown investigators, which was faster than Rowan had estimated and which she attributed to the fact that the names in the ledger, once seen by the right people in the capital, had apparently created a significant amount of urgency. The formal confrontation with Deverin happened in the castle's council chamber on the 4th morning. She had attended many proceedings in her imagination, had anticipated this one specifically, had run through the most likely scenarios, and prepared for them with the thoroughness she applied to everything. The reality was both more and less dramatic than she'd expected, in the way that most real things were. Deverin was a tall man in his 60s, silver-haired and composed with the composure of someone who had been composing himself professionally for decades. He walked into the council chamber with the bearing of a man who expected to manage the situation, which told her immediately that he didn't yet understand the specific nature of what he was facing. She was seated at the council table between Alaric and one of the Crown investigators. She was wearing her own clothes, as she had been for every occasion in this castle, and she had the full evidence chain in front of her, organized into the sequence she'd established, and she was calm in the way she was always calm when she was about to play a hand she'd built carefully. Deverin looked at the table when he entered. His eyes moved across the faces. Alaric, the investigators, Hessa, and then reached Rowan and stopped. She saw the recognition happen, not of her specifically. He wouldn't know her face, but of the documentation in front of her, and the particular way she was sitting with it, and the quality of her attention as it returned his gaze without any of the social deference that everyone else in the room was extending to some degree by virtue of his position. He knew what she was. He understood in that first moment that she was the person who had built the case against him. Good, she thought. She wanted him to know. The proceeding ran for 3 hours. Deverin was, as she'd expected, extremely good. He had prepared defenses, the kinds of defenses that a very intelligent person constructs when they have a few days to work with. He challenged provenance on 3 documents, presented alternative interpretations for 4 of the accounting irregularities, and at one point made an argument about the transitional authorization structure that was, she had to admit, genuinely sophisticated. She dismantled each of them. Not with drama. Not with the performance of a courtroom advocate building to an emotional crescendo. She did it the way she did everything. With precision, with patience, and with the particular advantage of someone who had built the case herself and therefore knew every component of it at a depth that no one trying to construct a defense in 3 days could match. When he challenged the transitional authorization structure, she produced the corresponding cross-reference from the capital correspondence files that she'd found on day 4 of the second investigation, the one that closed the gap he was trying to use. When he questioned the provenance of 2 documents from the keeper's cabin, she walked through the evidence chain for the ledger's location and custody in a sequence that was unbroken from its discovery to its current position on the table. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, Deverin stopped responding to the investigator's questions. The silence that followed was different from the silences she'd experienced in the proceedings up to that point. It was the silence of a man who had spent 9 years building something and was now watching it come apart with sufficient thoroughness that there was nothing left to defend. He looked at her across the table. "Who are you?" he said. It was not, she understood, a question about her name or her position. It was the question that the gambler in the broken wheel had answered with, "I find it interesting," and that 15 years of frontier survival answered with someone who learned to read every system she was put inside. "The person who read your records," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The 3rd auditor," he said. "The last one," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he looked at Alaric. And whatever he saw in Alaric's face, the same absolute unmanaged directness, that she'd stopped trying to defend against weeks ago, seemed to complete some final internal accounting. He turned to the lead Crown investigator. "I'd like to discuss terms," he said. "Chet." The proceedings moved to the capital the following week, taking Deverin, Edmund Crane, and the accumulated documentation with them. 3 other names emerged during the terms discussion. People at the edges of the network who had been complicit in smaller ways and who were now, with the core operation dismantled, cooperating with the speed of people whose primary loyalty had been to their own safety. Gareth Solon, in exchange for his cooperation in the capital proceedings, was offered a reduced sentence and exile. Rowan, when asked her opinion, said she found the arrangement acceptable. What she did not say was that Solon, in the locked cabinet of the lower archive, had made a decision that had cost him significantly and had nonetheless made it, and she had not entirely resolved how she felt about that. She told Alaric this on the evening after the Capitol riders left, sitting in the east corridor in the chair that had become, without formal designation, her chair. "He could have let the ledger disappear," she said. "It would have been simpler for him." "He could have," Alaric said. "He made the calculation that the network surviving was worse than his own exposure." She turned the bone dice over. "That's not a good man making a moral choice. That's a pragmatic man making a pragmatic choice. But the outcome is the same. Does the motivation matter?" "I don't know," she said. "I keep thinking it should. And then I think about the 14 settlements, and I think that outcomes matter more than motivations when the people affected don't get to choose either." He was quiet for a moment. "The settlements," he said. "The restoration fund will be distributed starting next month. I'd like you to oversee the allocation." She looked at him. "That's not head of Frontier Administrative Reconstruction," he said, "which is your position. The allocation falls within it." "I didn't formally accept that position," she said. "You've been doing it for 3 weeks," he said, "without a formal title, without formal pay, without most of the things that positions come with. I've been paid. The auditor rate," he said, "which is not the reconstruction head rate." A pause. "I owe you 3 weeks of back pay at the correct rate." She looked at him. Something was happening in the quality of this conversation, a lightness she hadn't felt in any of their interactions before, a shift in the register from the serious and careful toward something that had room in it for the other things, the things they'd been navigating around for weeks. "That's a number I'd want verified," she said. "I can provide documentation," he said. "Of course you can," she said. "You had someone sorting invoices for you, who was extremely efficient." "He was," Alaric said. "I've thought about offering him a permanent position." She looked at him steadily. "He'd want to know the full terms before accepting." "Naturally," he said. "Full transparency. All relevant information disclosed up front. Unlike previous arrangements." "Unlike all previous arrangements," he said. "Going forward." The corridor was quiet. The lamp was burning steadily. She could feel through the bond the quality of his attention, the warmth of it, the particular steadiness she'd come to think of as characteristic, as specifically his. She had spent 37 years without anything like this, and a month and a half learning to live with it, and she was nowhere near finished learning, but she was, she found, not afraid of the learning anymore. She picked up the bone dice and looked at them for a long moment. Then she put them down on the floor between them. "Ask me again," she said. He looked at the dice, then at her. "Stay," he said. "Not for the work, not for the case, because this is where you belong." He held her gaze. "Because I have never met anyone who sees the way you see, and I have spent 8 years looking for the truth in my own kingdom, and I found it in you. Because the bond is permanent, and the reason it doesn't frighten you is the same reason it doesn't frighten me." A pause. "Because you are the most honest person I have ever known, and honesty, in my experience, is the rarest thing in the world." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're still going to make decisions without consulting me sometimes," she said. "Yes," he said, "probably. And I'm going to be furious about it." "Yes," he said, "probably. And the court is going to be difficult for a long time." "Less long than they think," he said. "You've already recalibrated 2 of them without trying." Lady Crane. "And Hessa," he said, who did not need recalibrating but has nonetheless formed opinions about you that she expresses through efficiency rather than words. Something shifted in Rowan's chest. Not the bond, or not only the bond. Something of her own that had been building since the moment she'd walked into the broken wheel and looked across a room and found a person playing a game in a way she'd never seen anyone play it before. The frontier settlements, she said. The allocation. I want to be involved in the design, not just the distribution. The money isn't the problem. The structural deficiencies are the problem. The money addresses the immediate situation, but the structure needs rebuilding from the governance level up. Yes, he said, and I want direct authority over the auditing process going forward, not advisory, direct. Yes. And I want Column kept on, she said. He's good. He's going to be better. Done, he said. And she stopped. And, he said. She looked at him. And yes, she said. I'll stay. The corridor was quiet for a moment. She felt through the bond the thing that had no clean name, the thing she'd been bumping up against for weeks and retreating from because she didn't have a framework for it, and which she was now not retreating from, and which was, she decided, not actually a problem that required a framework. Some things preceded frameworks. Some things were simply true before you had the language for them. He reached across the floor and picked up the bone dice. He held them for a moment. The worn surfaces, the particular weight of something that had been handled for 15 years and had the texture of a life on it. Then he held them out to her. She took them. Their hands were warm at the exchange point. You never told me, he said, about the dice, where they came from. My mother's, she said. She was a gambler too, better than me, probably. I didn't know her well enough to be sure. What happened to her? The road, she said. She sent me away when I was 9. I think she thought staying with her was a worse prospect than going without her. She turned the dice over. She wasn't wrong. She was just wrong about her reasoning. How so? She thought she was sending me somewhere safer, Rowan said. She was actually teaching me how to survive anywhere. She looked at the dice one more time, then pocketed them. The frontier turned out to be survivable. Turns out most things are, if you pay enough attention. He looked at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to defend against. The unmanaged, direct version that she now understood was not a loss of control, but the opposite of it. The deliberate choice to be present. The court session next week, he said. I'll be there, she said. You'll want to know, there's a formal presentation component. The Frontier Administrative Reconstruction is being officially announced. You'll be named. She absorbed this. In what capacity? In your capacity, he said. Head of Frontier Administrative Reconstruction, Direct Auditing Authority, the full list. He paused. And whatever else is true by then, which will also be true in public. She looked at him for a moment. That's going to create a significant amount of noise. Yes, he said. The court, he said, with the particular dryness she'd come to love. She named it, internally, without drama, the way she named all accurate assessments. Can develop new categories. They're overdue. She was quiet for a moment, then, the formal presentation. What am I supposed to wear? Whatever you own, he said, on the condition that it has a pocket. She raised an eyebrow. For the dice, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed. A real one. Not the controlled sound she produced in professional contexts, but the unguarded version. The one she hadn't produced in front of another person in so long that she'd half forgotten what it felt like. It felt, she discovered, like something returning. He was smiling, and she felt it through the bond as warmth moving outward, and the corridor was lit with the lamp's steady light. And outside, the frontier was cold and clear and full of the particular quality of winter that came not as threat, but as certainty. A season that knew what it was, that made no apologies for its cold, that was simply itself with absolute consistency. She had spent 15 years being winter. She was finding that spring was not, as she'd always assumed, the province of other people. 6 months later, the table was set up in the East Corridor. Her corridor, as it had come to be known. Not officially, not with a plaque or a formal designation, but in the way that things became true in a place over time, through repetition and the accumulation of small daily facts. The chair was her chair. The lamp bracket held the right kind of oil because someone had learned her preference and maintained it without being asked. The stacks of documentation that moved through the space had the particular organized quality of a system she'd designed, because they were. It was a table for two, with a small lamp between them, and at the center of the table were her bone dice, placed there by her deliberately, in the position of something that was both invitation and symbol. Alaric came in at this time she'd told him, which was not a given. 6 months of learning his schedule had taught her that he ran slightly late when the day's demands accumulated and slightly early when he was looking forward to something. He was slightly early. He looked at the table, at the dice, at her, sitting on one side of it with her arms folded and the expression that she'd learned he found simultaneously difficult and irresistible to read. Dice, he said. First to hold the highest accumulated roll across 5 throws, she said. Standard rules. My dice. Stakes. She looked at him. The Eastern Settlement Allocation Model, she said. I want to add a direct governance audit component at the settlement level rather than the regional level. You think the regional model is more efficient. We've been discussing this for 2 weeks. We have. Loser concedes the point, she said. Winner's model goes forward. He sat down across from her. He looked at the dice for a moment with the expression she now knew meant he was running a different kind of calculation than the surface one. You realize, he said, that I've been playing dice considerably longer than you. You realize, she said, that I beat you the first time we played. I pulled my last throw. You did, she said. Do that again, and I'll never let you forget it. Something happened to his face. The thing that made him look like a different person, that she now understood was him being, simply, happy. She felt it through the bond as warmth and particularity and the specific texture of a person who had been looking for something for a long time and found it where they hadn't expected, and she felt her own corresponding warmth moving back along the same thread, unhidden, because she had stopped hiding it sometime in the past 6 months without making a ceremony of the decision. He picked up the dice, rolled them between his fingers once, the gesture she'd catalogued on their first night, the deliberate economical preparation of someone who took what they were doing seriously. Then he set them down and pushed them to the center of the table. Settlement level audit, he said. Your model is probably right. She looked at him. You're conceding before we play. I'm acknowledging what the evidence supports, he said, which is different from conceding. A pause. The regional model has structural advantages that should be preserved. We should talk about how to integrate both. She looked at him for a long moment, then she picked up the dice. After the game, she said. After the game, he agreed. She rolled. The dice tumbled across the table. Her mother's dice, worn smooth by 2 lifetimes of handling, bone white in the lamplight, rolling with the particular randomness of things that were partly skill and partly fortune and partly the simple fact of being in motion, which was the only honest description of anything worth doing. They landed. She looked at the number. She looked at him. He looked at the number, then at her, and the quality of his gaze was the same as the first night in the broken wheel, and completely different from it. The same focused attention, the same genuine interest, but no longer the interest of a stranger encountering something unexpected. The interest of a person who knew exactly what he was looking at and found it. Still, after 6 months and 47 dice games and more conversations than either of them had counted, the most interesting thing in any room. Your throw, she said. He rolled. Outside, the frontier winter was ending. The first hard morning that felt like early spring had come 3 days ago. Still cold, but differently cold, with the particular quality of cold that was loosening rather than deepening. In the 14 frontier settlements, the Restoration Fund allocation had been fully distributed, and the governance audit component was being piloted in 3 of them. The results, at 2 months in, were what she'd projected. She was not gloating about this in any public forum, which she considered a significant act of personal restraint. Deverin's formal proceedings had concluded 6 weeks ago. Edmund Crane's had concluded 2 weeks after that. The capital administration had been restructured around the gap left by the removals, with new appointments that Hessa had been involved in vetting and which Rowan had reviewed for financial risk. The system was not fixed. Systems were never fixed. They were only maintained, but it was more honest than it had been, and honesty, as she'd said once in a corridor on a night that felt like a different version of her life, was rarer than the arithmetic. The dice landed. She counted. He counted. After 5 throws, she had won by 3 points. She sat back in her chair and said nothing, because she didn't need to say anything. The number was the number. The evidence supported the conclusion. That was how things worked when they worked correctly. Settlement level audit, he said. Your model. With the regional integration component, she said, your instinct about the regional structure is correct. It's an overlay, not a replacement. He looked at her. You knew that going in. I knew we'd both be right about part of it, she said. The game was to establish who led the design. And you won. And I won, she said. He picked up the dice, her dice, which had migrated to his side of the table during the throws, and turned them over in his fingers. The same gesture she made. She'd noticed months ago that he'd adopted it, and had not said anything about it because she found that she didn't want to. Best of 3, he said. The settlement allocation briefing is tomorrow morning, she said. We both need sleep. Best of 3 another night. Best of 3 another night, she agreed. He set the dice back on the table between them. They sat in the quiet of the corridor. Her corridor, his castle, the frontier outside settling into the first tentative warmth of a season that hadn't decided yet but was leaning towards something better. And the lamp burned steady between them, and the bond was warm in her chest the way it always was, present and particular, and entirely without apology, and she sat with it the way she was learning to sit with good things, without waiting for them to leave. She was 37 years old. She had been thrown out of her first home at 9. She had spent 15 years making herself ungovernable, unreachable, unreliable to everyone except her own instincts, because instincts didn't leave and people did, and the road was at least honest about what it was. She had walked into a tavern in a frontier settlement looking for one big win before disappearing again, and she had found something she didn't have a name for yet, something that was still being named, that was still in the process of becoming whatever it was going to be, that was not finished and might never be finished, and was, she had discovered, better for it. The dice were on the table. The lamp was burning. He was looking at her with the expression she had stopped trying to not love. She named it, finally, without ceremony, in the quiet of her own mind, the way she named all accurate assessments when she'd collected enough evidence to be certain. The Eastern briefing, she said. What time did you schedule it? 7, he said. I know you prefer 8. I'm prepared to renegotiate. 7:30, she said. Done, he said. Outside, the frontier was waking up into spring. Inside, the lamp burned between them, and the dice sat at the center of the table, and everything that had been won was still being won. Not finished, not settled, not the kind of ending that was really an ending. The kind that was, instead, a door left open on purpose. She reached across the table and picked up the dice, put them in her pocket, stood up. 7:30, she said. Don't be late. She walked down the corridor toward her own rooms. Her rooms, in this castle, in this place that had become the thing she hadn't believed in for 15 years and had found anyway. The way you found anything real, not by looking for it, but by paying attention to everything else until it was simply there. Behind her, she felt him watching. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. For the first time in 15 years, everything she needed was already in front of her. But the bone dice were warm in her pocket. They had always been her mother's. Now they were hers. And that, she thought, was how most good things worked. Inherited, worn smooth by use, and finally, your own.